Happy Monday to you on the Fan Midday Show. Jimmy Cook, Scott Agnes, Eddie Garrison guiding us throughout the afternoon. Thanks so much for stopping by. Well removed now from the 2023 NBA Draft. NBA free agency on the horizon. Of more reactions to where the Pacers go from here with free agency. Victor Wembanyama, the Spurs' #1 pick, is making NBA goals look like Fisher-Price goals, and his little audition tape or first meeting with the media earlier in the week. And the Pacers are well on their way to what they feel like is their last trip now behind them in the NBA Draft Lottery. Scott, you were at Pacers headquarters covering it all on Thursday. You had the experience last year of being in New York for the draft. How was it different this year from your coverage standpoint, being here, getting to see it all from the team's perspective versus the full national flavor with the type of moves that they made, including that trade to go back one spot to get Jarris Walker?
Yeah, I made the executive decision not to go to the draft this year, knowing that it's going to be an active draft for the Pacers. And I thought it was going to be one more move. I thought it'd be slightly more active. But ultimately, they made 3 trades in, 48 hours of the draft. And basically, the best move they did easily was moving back 7 spots and getting $4.5 million from the Lakers to do so. And Herb Simon says thank you very much. And then on top of that, something that I haven't heard people talk about, by the way, is not only were they able to pick up a couple second-round picks, although it's way off in the future.
Yeah.
2028 is one of them, and 2029 is the other. But on top of that, by drafting Jarris Walker 1 spot later, you save some extra cash, too, against your cap, your books, your salary cap space as well. Probably about $500,000 on rookie-scale contracts that first year. So, good work by the Pacers and able to do that. I thought for sure, and they were trying, I really thought they were going to be able to swing a trade leading up to the draft to acquire that wing that they have been after for a while. I will say, though, the only thing I wouldn't have liked about it is, without a doubt, the 7th pick was would have been included.
Right.
I thought they could have swung a trade without dealing number 7. Because I thought, as we alluded to, I think last week for the one day I was in here, I thought it was incredibly important for them to have one more swing at the bat, hit it. Doesn't have to be a grand slam, but it should get you a triple at least for the foreseeable future, and then not go back to this lottery days again. What do you think about draft night?
Well, it felt ominous to me in the days leading up that perhaps they wouldn't have as much success in the trade market, given that I had thought, at least on value, with this draft still being viewed by many as a good deep draft, even though top heavy for sure once you get to the likes of Scoot Henderson, Brandon Miller, and Victor Wembanyama. Then when you get past that, I mean, it's like every year it's a guessing game of who's going to go where and if the Pacers were to go best available or fit. But going back to the trades before the draft, it felt like if there was going to be a window to get into the 15 to 20 range or move up there for them to package some of the other draft assets they had this year, we know they made those calls. They were honest about it and said they had tried their best to try to move up, especially when Cam Whitmore was actually in free fall during the draft.
That would have been very interesting. Right
it would have been fascinating to have been able to happen. And obviously he ends up in Houston, and they had mentioned, Chad Buchanan had referenced with Kevin and Query on Friday that they did their best to try to make a move there, but the value was too much and price was a little bit too steep for where they wanted to go. So I wasn't as perplexed as I thought I would be that there wasn't more activity on the trade market for them. But yeah, the oversighted point that you brought up is that they're able to save a little bit of cash, which you'll ask anybody that's been with a front office in a small market before. Anytime you're able to do that and still find the player of need you want, you're going to be happy with it. And if Jarris Walker is indeed the type of player that maybe not immediately right away, everybody's got to develop in their own path, but if he's the type of power forward that is there for the Pacers and as a cornerstone of what this franchise wants to be in 3, 4, or 5 years, we're going to really see an opportunity for them to get back to where they want to go.
Yeah, the cash from the Lakers, that's nice for your Herb Simon,
right,
if you're him. Meanwhile, the savings for Jarris Walker by the Pacers, that really appeals to the front office and Ted Wu, their salary cap guru, because it gives them just a little bit extra flexibility. It's $500,000, but still there's ways to figure it out and make that more feasible. In terms of being at the draft, you were asking about that.
Yeah.
I kind of gave a long-winded answer about the draft decision and saving money. The cool thing about that experience is to see them to walk around on the main floor there at Barclays Center, and then to the back rooms and see them do probably more than a dozen different interviews, both on camera, radio, a press conference. Then he jumps on a Zoom with the local media, which I was on back here in Indy. But those guys are worn out by basically the car wash, if you will, of the different things that they have to follow. But there's something cool about, I remember a couple of years ago with Benedict Matherin, there was the practice court weight room. And so I was in there with him for about 5 minutes. So I was able to get a brief alone time. But in the big picture, he's talking to so many different outlets. It's not a true, exclusive or anything like that. But it is a good opportunity to get a feel for the individual once again, because again, Jarris Walker was in town for a workout, and we're fortunate to be able to attend the end of that and talk with him. But I thought it was a really good draft for the Pacers. If they would have been able to complete a trade and either get Cam Whitmore or get a veteran wing, then I thought it would have been an ideal, knocked it out of the park type draft for them.
Do you expect that type of desire to go get a veteran, desire to find a veteran that would help within wing depth, even with the draft they just put together, to be an aggressive takeaway or an aggressive mindset for them with free agency on the horizon?
What's really interesting, Jimmy, is they have one roster spot right now after adding two, and Ben Shepherd and Jarris Walker, and they still haven't consolidated their current roster. They slightly did their draft picks. And what did I set the over-under at 2.5 draft picks? You did. Were you saying 3.5? I forget.
I had felt like that 3.5 would probably be a better mark, but okay. I took the over.
And it turned out to actually be closer to what it was. But 2.5 was what I was saying all along of what I thought the draft picks would be. And I think ideally they would have bundled a couple more of them and say current player and being able to get a Cam Whitmore. The trouble is what happened with Minnesota a year ago. Rudy Gobert in Minnesota and new owner syndrome with A-Rod and his partner there completely inflated prices. So much like you go in the grocery or buying tickets or whatever, what it costs to go get a player is significantly more than what it had been. Again, if you're talking about an OG Anunoby, for example, that's going to be probably 4 first-round picks. And by the way, as we discussed last week, he's only under contract for 1 more year. So you can't restrict yourself like that, send out so many future assets without certainly an agreement in place for the long term. And there's kind of ways you can go around that, but not exactly.
You and I are in the same boat on evaluating draft trades and evaluating just trades in general with how market value is impacted on it, that you're going to see response from teams once a big deal like that is made. But I think you and I are also in the same boat that before we continue with this, the Rudy Gobert trade was a horrific trade. I was not a fan of it in any capacity.
Ever.
And
not then, not now.
That was by no means a controversial take. A lot of people gave pushback when the move happened, which begs this question, because you go to the NFL and the thought had been, especially with out in Baltimore, the Lamar Jackson contract negotiations and whether or not they'd be able to agree on a deal. And what a lot of people pointed to, myself included, was, well, perhaps the move that the Browns made to go get Deshaun Watson, which was, again, a trade that involved multiple first-round picks, and then they wound up giving him a fully guaranteed contract of the highest order, something the league had never seen. Some had thought that a move like that completely resets a market. You're going to see now at the bargaining table guaranteed contracts be the norm in the NFL.
True.
We're a year removed from that, and that has not been the case. But in the NBA, with that trade of a treasure trove of draft picks, it still feels like they were quicker to adapt to. If you're a front office that sees what happened in the Rudy Gobert deal, you're like, whoa. We want something like that in return. This is truly the standard. So I find that fascinating. And why do you think that is with both leagues, that on the one hand, something that felt like it could be precedent changing completely has gone by the wayside? Owners don't want to give guaranteed money. We've had this discussion before. But with the NBA, when you still have a trade like that for a above average player in Rudy Gobert, by no means a superstar player, that is still had ripple effects in the NBA.
Dude, I'm not sure he's an all-star.
I mean, again, I'm not gonna fully tear down the guy, but yeah, I mean,
you watch him in the playoffs and teams hunt him.
Yeah.
They don't stay away from him because of the challenge. They target him. They put him in pick and roll situations, things like that. That's a dead giveaway. I like to see what players think of him. And you can observe that both in how they vote for the All-Stars now, and you can observe that in the playoffs if they reach the playoffs. And I thought it was very odd, too, is yesterday they agreed to a deal with their backup center. So now they have 3 centers on their roster. To me, I think you got to move Karl Anthony Towns.
Yeah, Nas Reed got that extension.
Yeah, Nas Reed. I think Karl Anthony Towns is the one you move. You're not going to be able to move Rudy Gobert. But to your bigger point, yeah, in terms of Rudy Gobert and in that situation, you saw the trickle-down effect in terms of even whatever that was a month ago.
We're through
Kevin
a trade
Durant
deadline.
into the Phoenix Suns.
Right.
The Suns gave everything they were possibly able to give. Any additional first-round picks they had left, which I don't think they did, so they had to pick swap. And then all their second-round picks for this decade, because remember, at the trade deadline, they agreed to the deal to acquire him from Brooklyn, and in doing so, sent out a treasure trove there before the Suns were able to, this most recent deal, acquiring Bradley Beal from the Washington Wizards.
And at least with Kevin Durant, it makes sense, right? If the Rudy Gobert trade, if you turn the clocks back, and it's a trade for Kevin Durant that is of that high of value, particularly of first-round assets, I can get behind that. That's not as head-scratching to me as the deal itself for Rudy Gobert. With Bradley Beal, the injury and the health concerns are there. I've never been a viewpoint of him being, because of the health and because of he's been on such a poor team, of if you put him on a good roster, what would he actually be if he could stay healthy? And I get the Phoenix Suns wanting to be in this win-now mode of we're going to still keep alive this Big 3 era. I guess Big 4 from a salary standpoint if you include DeAndre Ayton in there, but still very much a 2010s way of roster construction. Those type of trades I get, but I'm talking about the fact that there's still pushback for players that are around Rudy Gobert's talent level or maybe a little bit better. OG Anunoby's a better player than Rudy Gobert, but I don't know that he's a better player than Kevin Durant. But you still see these franchises, because of the Gobert trade, not willing to back down from, no, it's 3 or 4 first rounders is how you get to the table.
The one I feel really set this off that I remember was 5 years ago, Anthony Davis from New Orleans to the Lakers. They gave up a ton, but they also won a title, so great. The other one, I was very curious what they gave up because it didn't feel like a lot at the time, but it was Drew Holiday from Milwaukee, and ultimately it was much more than I thought, as Milwaukee gave up 3 first-round picks and 2 pick swaps. Because I thought I remembered at the time thinking, wow, that's nothing for Drew Holiday. And guess what? They went on to win a title, so that was absolutely worth it, whatever you gave up here. But you're seeing, I think, it's obvious that if it's a guy like Kevin Durant, you're going to give up any and everything. You're going to have to. But what about that next tier? OG Anunoby, not an all-star.
Right.
And you're wanting 4 and 5 first-round picks. That makes it difficult. And then another guy they were in on, DeAndre Hunter down in Atlanta. Young guy, little high contract, I think is part of the issue, is starting a 4-year, $90 million deal this upcoming season. You would know you have his contract under control, though, if you acquired him. Tobias Harris, another player they expressed interest to and had some talks with the 76ers about, nothing significant. Tobias Harris is interesting because right now they have over $30 million in cap space. They could swing a 1-year deal for a guy like that. Tobias Harris only under contract 1 more season, but then you'd want to have him under contract after that. And without that guarantee, again, that was a situation where Pacers are sitting there and we can't give up so much for a guy, at least today, we're not certain will be here for 1 more year, because otherwise it makes a ton of sense. Right. That would be a great use of their cap space this upcoming year. It fills the need on the wing, a guy that's underproduced and really could use a fresh scenery, if you will, I think, here with the Pacers, a new team and that sort of thing. And then you would hope you could be able to re-sign him for another 3 years and get something a little bit more affordable. Maybe it's 3 years, $80 million after that.
As you look at the path that they're on, I mean, we're both in agreement. Leave no stone unturned. If you're able to find something that speeds this process along or helps develop the rookies, then by all means do it via trade. If you're able to get a price that is palatable for you. Again, we already mentioned with the OG Anunoby rumors, just the ramifications with Rudy Gobert's trade, that, the asking price or starting price for even players that could potentially grow into all-star level or above players, at least in the eyes of the franchise that holds their rights, are 3 or 4 first-rounders. With free agency on the horizon and you look at the needs this team still needs to address with the cap space that's there, is the door in your mind closed on trades being the answer to fill that role?
No.
I think at this point it's free agency, and if not, as you said there, where's the best value in your mind right now as we look at this free agency class?
That's why I don't think the door can be shut, Jimmy, on possibly acquiring teams. One, teams that need to get off money. Secondly, you got to remember with this new CBA, collective bargaining agreement, that takes effect July 1, no longer can teams wait to hit the salary floor until this time next year. Usually it doesn't matter until July 1, June 30th of the previous year. Starting this year, I forget what the exact date is, but basically let's call it opening day. Teams have to be above that salary floor, which means I think the Pacers need to spend roughly another $18 million to hit that without facing penalty.
Is that including us simming out what the rookie contracts will be?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, that's including these rookie contracts for the 2 first-round picks. Sure. That's all that matters.
So it's $18 million on top of that for the 2 first-rounders. They're not a part of the $18 million figure?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
Yep.
And that's just a rough ballpark we're talking about here. 15, 18 million or so is, I think, the number they have to hit at. So, there's going to be movement there. Again, you need clarity in the front court. I think you have to move on from at least one of those bigs. We cannot run it back with Jalen Smith and Isaiah Jackson. Oh, and don't forget, what's Daniel Tice's role? Yeah. I'm not sure anybody knows just yet. He does fill a great need. You love that experience, but also I think he's more built for a team ready to win now. He could fill that veteran influence while also being the backup center. I'd have a hard time seeing him the third-string center. And if that, how much are you negatively impacting the development of either a first-round pick you drafted 3 years ago in Isaiah Jackson or in Jalen Smith, who you're very high of, is under contract for certain for another year. You got to figure that out. And then I think there's the question at shooting guard a little bit, especially as you bring in another one, and Ben Shepherd, who can play the 2 and 3. So maybe he spends more time at the 3. But with Chris Duarte, with Buddy Hield, you can include Andrew Nembhard in that conversation because he started at the 2 for much of this past season. That 2, to me, needs some clarity.
How likely is it, and he's been the common trade piece or common just he needs to be moved at some point topic of conversation as you bring up Chris Duarte, Jimmy Cook, Scott Agnes here on the Fan Midday Show. What's the likelihood that he is on this roster by the time training camp rolls around? Because I didn't know if I saw a home for him here before the draft. And then you figure, at least in terms of mouths to feed and where they want roles and developments to be, Ben Shepherd would likely leapfrog him, at least in terms of looking down at what this season could be. And they went, when they took Duarte, with the idea of this is a player that's ready right now, that has had multiple years in college, that doesn't need as much time to develop, but with how the roster's been constructed, and obviously he's dealt with an injury as well, but it hasn't been as easy or as plug and play as they thought it would be with Duarte. Yeah,
but I would push back a little bit there. I wouldn't foresee Ben uprooting Chris's position. Remember, he's a rookie. This is all new to him. Now, like Chris Duarte, he's a mature 4-year guy that's coming into the league, but this first year, it's a whirlwind. You haven't played in any of these venues, really. You're still traveling. You're playing 3 times as many games as you previously did. And keep in mind, he played at Belmont, so the competition he went up against, this is not just another level. This is probably 3 steps up to what he faced. Now, he's an incredible shooter, and that translates to any game. I'm curious what it'll look like initially defensively. And so if Chris, if you can see him do what he did defensively his rookie year, he's really going to be an impactful player because we know he can shoot. That was just about him trying to find his place, I think, early in the season. He was a little bit out of whack. You know, whose role is it? Whose team is this? Okay, Matherin's the fun young guy. Like, he's getting all the attention. I think Chris really had to settle in, take ownership of what his role could be, but he like the rest of the team, mostly terrible defensively. And so if he can get back to what he was his rookie year, improve upon that, not have a season injury filled, because I think it was last off season he was dealing with a little bit of an ankle injury as well. I actually had heard at Summer League, look out, he's probably going to need surgery here. Well, it didn't happen, but there were those concerns back then, which you know means that was something floated through Chris's mind as well. So, no, I'm still intrigued by Chris, but I also recognize maybe a more ready team would be interested in his services, whereas the Pacers just added another guy at similar position right there. But I will say, too, Chris's value's lower than it once was. Lower than it was beginning of last season, and certainly before that or after that at the trade deadline. So you don't want to sell low, and so that's something the Pacers have to consider.
What's a successful campaign for him then? Because again, obviously he's not your starting two guard or starting at the three at this point. The lineup that we would likely see next year, if everything's perfect from a development standpoint, they want to pull the trigger on Jarris Walker, would be some combination of Tyrese Halliburton, Benedict Mathurin, Jarris Walker, Miles Turner, and then
Andrew
Nembhard, right? I mean, that
defense,
right?
You have to. I think that's what I'm looking at right now. That's how I would project it out, and that's assuming that Buddy's good with coming off the bench, taking the back seat.
So in that scenario, you don't have him in. You don't have Buddy in the starting five. Is that what you're saying?
No, Mathurin is my starting.
Okay, I'm sorry.
three.
When you said Buddy, okay, my fault. Yes.
Yeah.
Right.
I think
that's something he's okay with.
I don't know that. I'm saying he has to be okay with that, or that. If it hasn't happened already, that's a conversation that will absolutely be had.
Yeah.
And the one concern I would have for that is him and Tyrese play so well off each other. Tyrese attacks and knows Buddy's available. Those guys communicate without communicating out there. They're so comfortable with each other going into year 4 here. And then Buddy spaces the floor so well, is a great 3-point shooter, understands the pushback that's healthy with Tyrese. So that would take a little bit getting used to. And I'd actually want to do something where maybe you stagger them. So maybe Mathurin's the first sub out and Buddy's the first sub in, if he's comfortable with that. Which I think at this stage, if they could be a playoff team, how could he not be? Because that's his number one goal right now. He wants to be part of a team that finally reaches the postseason. He's in his 30s already. This dude's competitive as hell, watched every bit of the playoffs. He's working out every day at his home gym, which is incredible.
Yeah.
And he wants to play in the playoffs.
So give me your 5 real quick on opening day.
Tyrese Halliburton. As of today,
again, anything could happen. We have no idea what free agency's going to... But as you look at it right now, with needs they need, start a free agency, where's their 5?
Yeah, I think right now you're looking Halliburton, Andrew Nembhard, Benedict Mathurin, Jarris Walker, and Miles Turner.
Okay, so I wanted to make sure I didn't mishear you, because I think I added 6 players in my starting 5. I would sub Hield for Nembhard in my best 5 you could have out there on opening night. That's where I would
Not a ton of defense, though.
Sure.
That's the struggle right there. And if you're throwing now, I mean, you have basically you have a front court of defenders. Miles, who's proven what he can do, and Jarris can.
That's the biggest hype aspect of that, of having that front court.
But also you're a rookie, so there's the little nuances to the game.
Yeah.
He's got to pick up on. It's not just instinctual.
The only person I could see subbing out would be Nembhard, but I wouldn't think they would sub him out for Hield. I could see them subbing him out for Aaron Nesmith, because you need Nesmith's, defense along the wing to help with Walker, with there being such a driven league around the wings and the guard position. And plus, Nesmith's a guy that you can just go help space the floor a little bit. Sure, you get an extra ball handler out there with Andrew Nembhard, but how often are you asking Nembhard to handle the basketball with Tyrese on the floor?
To me, the 2 spot is the only one I feel like is in question.
Yeah.
If your core is Tyrese and Benedict, you're going in with that bunch.
And who knows, it could be a game-to-game, matchup-to-matchup scenario.
It could be. For the most part, I'm generally opposed to that. I like the consistency, the routine of that. To me, that speaks of we're still trying to figure it out. I think we all know what those guys are. Now, if there's Ben has a bad week of practice or just a couple bad performances in a row, maybe you tweak it up to try to get him and others going. But to me, the 2-man spot's the only one that's in question, and it could just depend what you need or what's working well. So it could be Nembhard, could be Buddy, could be Duarte, but probably not. But again, you really need a shooter out there.
Right.
And Nemhard's a really good shooter, so that helps, because Ben, he needs to shoot more threes, but he's going to look to attack. Tyrese, look to attack. And you got Walker and Miles already in the middle. That 2 spot, to me, really, Jimmy, has to be a guy on the perimeter who's a real threat. You have to guard him whether he has the ball or not.
I would have a hard time if I'm Buddy Hield stomaching coming off the bench at this stage in my career for A, the amount of money I'm making, and B, the fact that I started 73 games last year. I mean, I know nothing is guaranteed in this league. Like, you can't just, oh, well, he started 73 games, so he should be the starter.
Hold on. I got to correct you only because I love his story.
Sure.
He only missed 2 games, right?
I'm just going off of ESPN. I apologize.
But he healed? He only missed 2 games, and it was because of the health issue.
Right. He played in 80, but he started 73.
Oh, so, I'm sorry. You
started
said
73 games.
I meant played. Okay.
Right. Yeah,
yes.
yeah. Played in 80.
And the only reason he didn't start every game
right.
was because late in the season they said, let's see what Buddy looks like in the starting lineup.
Unless it is, like you mentioned, Buddy buys into that, and it is a true upgrade defensively, like this team's numbers are showing over a 5, 10, 15 game sample size that, yeah, having Nembhard in the starting lineup helps in terms of setting the tone defensively and being where we want to be in that area moving forward. I'd be fine with it. If not, the amount of money that he's making and the value he would still hold in the trade market, if that's what Buddy Hield's role is on the bench, I feel more aggressive towards my thought of he should be shot before the deadline than I do now, if that's what ends up happening.
Let's go a different route then. Let's say, what does the bench look like? Because that becomes really interesting. Let's say Andrew Nembhard's the one. Maybe you bring him off the bench, you start Buddy. Again, you keep starting Buddy, and I would not oppose to this. I just think Matherin at this stage now should start. I was great with him not last year. That's totally fine. I know a lot of fans were upset about that. It didn't bother me one bit, especially when after the season, Ben admitted, you know what, it was a good season. It could have been great. There were times I mentally wasn't there. I didn't play as hard as I want. Like, I appreciated the honesty and the candor from him. But I'm seeing that second unit could be Andrew Nembhard, Chris Duarte. I kind of lean Jalen Smith as the center. And Jordan Nwora, Aaron Nesmith. Am I missing someone?
In terms of what the second unit look
John
like?
McConnell?
And yeah. That becomes where do you find time for him? That becomes difficult because you absolutely do. You're right. You got to throw TJ in there sometime, probably before Duarte. That's probably what it is. It's TJ, Andrew, sure. And then a mix of what you need. See, that's again why they need to consolidate because they have so many players right now that you could make a great case for. Starting with, I think, Daniel Tice, Jalen Smith, and Isaiah Jackson. This is the Fan Midday Show. Thanks for listening here on 93.5 and 107.5 The Fan. Coming up at 12:30, we'll talk to IMG's director of basketball. He knows Jarris Walker very well, as Jarris spent 4 years down at IMG. Coming up at 1 o'clock, Beau Estes of NBA and NBA.com. And then at 2 o'clock, let's look ahead a little bit more to free agency, talk big picture in the NBA. Keith Smith, Spotrac, a cap guru, will join us to discuss all things big picture from the NBA beyond the Pacers. This is the Fan Midday Show on 93.5 and 107.5 The Fan.
The Fan.
Good afternoon. Thanks for listening to the Fan Midday Show with Jimmy Cook. I'm Scott Agnes. Let's go right to the hotline to learn more about the Pacers' top draft pick, Jarris Walker. We're joined with Brian Nash, the IMG Director of Basketball, joining us on the hotline. Brian, how are you, and what was your reaction last Thursday seeing not only Jarris taken by the Pacers, but at least a couple other former IMG players?
Yeah, Scott and Jimmy, thanks for having me. It was a great night. It's like one of those nights where you're like a proud parent, and anytime you can, when you have one player drafted, it's kind of a dream come true. And then when you get three players in the top 16 picks, it was kind of a surreal night for us.
How much conversation can you share that maybe you had with the Pacers and talking about Jarris Walker and previewing what's to come? I'm sure they had significant conversations trying to understand his game and what he's about. And one thing they highlighted was how with IMG he started kind of as a point guard and evolved into a much bigger player after that.
Yeah, I think when we go through this process every year, I think a lot of the questions that we get are background stuff and character and those things. I think a lot of the scouts do a good enough job with watching the kids play over the course of time and kind of finding out what their skill set is and those things. But, Jarris is he's a special talent. I think the Pacers got a really good one, not only a very good player, but just a high-character person.
Brian, what were your initial reactions and perspective when Jarris Walker shows up on IMG Academy's campus as a freshman?
Yeah, this is kind of the funny one. He had visited. He was the number one eighth grader in the country. For whatever that's worth in regards to that nowadays.
Yeah.
But he walked in and he looked like Larry Johnson. I mean, he was 6'6". He was 235 pounds. He was chiseled, and you said, "Oh my God, this kid's really going to be a freshman next year." So we were super excited to get him in the program, and again, just the way he was able to compete as a freshman on a team that had three other NBA players on it, and came in and really just invested in hard work and was coachable, and that's one of those things that I think everybody looks for so much in value in players. I mean, he's just he kind of hit the ground running, and we were so excited for what the future was going to be.
Joined with Brian Nash, IMG's Director of Basketball, where Jarris Walker played high school ball down there. When you think of Jarris and his development, where do you think you saw the most improvement over all those years, and then becoming a one-and-done player at Houston?
Yeah. So he's kind of unique. I mean, I've used the term with him, like he's a Swiss Army knife. Like he can do a little bit of everything. I know he's got the reputation and a lot of the things that were talked about with him were, being a great defender. I know that that was demanded of him here, and I know Coach Sampson at Houston demands that, and that's a big part of what they do. But he does his shooting has improved so much over the years. His ability to make plays off the dribble and either score for himself or make decisions for his teammates. So again, I think that's one of those good things about him, is that he's going to be able to find a way to impact the game in multiple areas.
Brian, we know obviously from his story that Jarris is the first player to go through IMG Academy for all 4 years, and with a program that's on the basketball side really only been around since 2000, and the national spotlight has been on you guys for the better part of a decade. How has that selling process for what IMG Academy can do for a young player changed over time? And with Jarris kind of being the guinea pig for what can happen if you're there all 4 years, what are your takeaways from what his departure and his ultimate journey as he continues in the NBA can do over at IMG?
Yeah, he's definitely become the poster child for us for a lot of our conversations when families are interested. The basketball piece here is off the charts. I mean, it's fantastic. They're gonna get great coaching. They're gonna get great development over the course of the time. But the thing that we're real fortunate about at the academy is we take a holistic approach. So every team's got their access to their own nutritionist. They have a leadership coach. They have a mental conditioning coach. They've gotten into the sports science side with load management. So I think they learn to have a pro mentality at an earlier stage, and they're in a super competitive environment, and their schedule, the elite youth basketball world right now with some of these really good high school teams in the AAU has kind of set it up where you're always competing against the best players. So Jairus, for us to go through and be that first 4-year player and to, see the full growth, not only just as a player, but as a person, for us, that's amazing. And, just for Jairus to actually achieve his goals it makes us super happy.
Brian Nash of IMG with us. Brian, it reminds me to a lesser extent of a lot of these foreign players who start going pro at 16 and 17. It's not quite to that level, but it's when you can really start taking the game more seriously, have those pro aspects to your game, go out away from home, being in an uncomfortable environment in terms of being away from friends and those sorts of things, and really try to center and focus on your future if you're that type of high-level athlete.
Yeah, and then the good thing about us, too, within so we have multiple teams at each one of we had 18 basketball teams last year, but we do have a national structure where, we have a post-grad national team, which has got 50 years and older kids. So our high school teams are, in the way we have our daily practices, they compete against each other in practice, multiple times over the course of the year. So it's not like you're just with your high school team and you compete against each other every day. Well, we're able to put them in different positions where they can play against older players, players that have height, players that have size. So it's a very competitive environment.
When you look back at Jairus' senior year and the final conversations before he ended up at Houston, what were the biggest areas that you guys felt at IMG as you were working with him he needed to take that jump at Houston to be able to have the one-and-done outcome that he did? And as you look at his game now, obviously to be able to go where he did in the draft and finish one-and-done at a program like Houston is an accomplishment in and of itself, but where do you want to continue to see him grow as he ends up here in Indiana?
Yeah, I think so. His senior year was, if we go back quickly to his progression, he comes in as a freshman and, he's fitting in and he's playing his role a lot more inside, a lot more physical. And then as you grow as a player, you always want to expand your game. You want to play on the perimeter. You want to work on your perimeter shooting. And he started doing that sophomore, junior year. He had an injury in there where he missed some time, but he struggled a little bit, and I think the struggle is good because I think the struggle helps you find out the best version of yourself and who you are. And his senior year for us, he took on a role where, winning was the most important thing. It was, coach, whatever role you want me to play. And, he played a lot of center for us our senior year because that's what was going to help us win. So I think, as he translated into college, I think he was ahead of the game because he knew what he was, and I think he knew how he could be successful, and I think that's why he continues to, he knows what those skill set areas are. He knows he can be a really good defender. He knows he's a great rebounder, and then his offensive game is going to keep evolving. So, I think that's some of the reasons why, and Coach Sampson obviously did a phenomenal job with him in a year and putting them in such a competitive environment. You look at that program and everything they've done and, just how competitive they are. I think that helps set Jairus up as well.
And Brian, those same traits you listed are, I think, the same things we saw at Houston. He was like the fourth option. He took a back seat to Marcus Sasser and others there. He was their best defender. He was willing to play multiple positions. Didn't need to shoot, but he did when he could. And I think one of the real values in a player coming to the NBA, if you're not that top tier, is knowing your role, owning it, and you can make hundreds of millions of dollars just locking in. Take a look at Draymond Green, right, for example, of knowing who you are and what you're about. And the other thing, Brian, I think that impresses me about Jairus is his family situation. He's got 3 older sisters, and that whole thing of how that shaped him, but at the same time being away from them at IMG, I think probably helped in his maturity at a young age. Is that one of the big sales points of IMG as well?
Yeah, it's not for everybody. Again, I think in his situation, Horace and Marcia, mom and dad are, just great parents. There's the story that we tell about, I think it was Jairus' 3rd or 4th week in school down here where, he just got in a little bit of trouble in the dorm. I mean, it wasn't anything serious, but it was just kind of, it gave Horace an opportunity to call down here and said, you know what, my son doesn't act like this. I don't know if this is the place for him, and threatened to have him out of here after the first 3 or 4 weeks. So it kind of gives you, the discipline of the family, the tough love, and Jairus wanted this. I mean, Jairus wanted the break. He wanted to, he didn't want to be penalized for a great opportunity. And, I think he articulated that to his family and was able to, convince them that this was going to be the best place for him.
Brian, as you look at the growth of IMG Academy and you're simulating and mapping out what the next 5 to 10 years looks like for you guys down in Florida, what do you envision that process being now that, as we've already talked about, you have a 4-year player that's gone through the ranks and now has made it to the NBA?
Yeah, no, this world is getting competitive. It's a little bit of a trickle down now with what's happening in colleges where, kids are starting to talk about NIL more, and, the schools won't have collectives themselves. But as the states start to, the state associations start to allow NIL for high school players, I mean, that's impacting where kids go. So, recruiting gets a little bit tougher. There are options out there. We play in a great league, the NIBC, which is the premier high school league in the country, which is a great draw for us because the kids know they're going to play against the best players every year. But, when you have the success of, 3 players drafted in the top 16, and, we have 14 players that are playing in the NBA right now. And then when people are fortunate enough to visit campus and they see the facilities and the people down here, I think we're not really going to try to change too much. We're just going to try to do it a little bit better and, just keep continuing that holistic approach with the kids.
Talking with Brian Nash of the IMG, Director of Basketball. Brian, I want to pivot one question here, and that's because Zach Edey, Purdue star, spent some time down at IMG and now is crushing it at Purdue, had serious conversations about going to the NBA, but ultimately is going to return to Purdue. Can you kind of describe maybe what you felt like he was like when he arrived on campus there at IMG, maybe the rawness to his game, and now where he's at as the top basketball player in college last year?
Yeah, I don't think anybody could have guessed or forecasted the trajectory of where he's at. Zach was from Canada, and when I had coached in college, one of my former players was coaching him on the AAU circuit and said, "Hey, I want you to take a look at this kid. He's big, he's massive, he's." The one thing that stood out was that as big as he was, and he had only been playing for a couple of years, was that he had really good hands and really good feet. And, we decided to, take a chance on him. And, he didn't play on our national team the first year that he got here. We wanted him to get a lot of playing time and develop and, not kind of stun his growth by throwing him into too competitive of an environment. And then his senior year, he played on our national team and, again, played with Mark Williams, who had gotten drafted by Charlotte, played at Duke, and he had to fight for everything that he got, but started showing some flashes. But again, the stuff that he's done, that he's been able to do at Purdue, and what Matt's done with them is it's incredible. Just super happy for him as well too.
Yeah, that's a remarkable track because now he's about to probably be at center for the Canadian national team coming up in the World Cup. So quite a ride for him. Brian, thanks so much for the time and educating us on a little bit about what Jairus was like down at IMG. Appreciate it.
I appreciate your time. Thanks, guys.
That's perfect. That's Brian Nash of IMG. I laughed because I said thank you, and Siri goes, "You're welcome."
Hey, Siri just wanted to be involved in the pleasantries.
That's fantastic.
That's nice.
She's just listening into my our conversation here. But no, that's interesting. My biggest takeaway, Jimmy, from all that is Jairus.
all the series are now going off in the studio, so that's where we're at. It's good.
It is. That's
Happy
great.
Monday.
Biggest takeaway is Jairus is exactly who he has been. He's willing to be a team player. He knows his role. He embraces that. He knows he needs to become a better shooter, but he's going to lock into what he can do defensively and his versatility on both ends of the floor. And he has those principles instilled, learned from his sisters, his parents, and at the IMG Academy for 4 years. That's helped shape him to who he is here as 19-year-old, 20-year-old walking into the Pacers now.
It's fascinating to have that in your back pocket. I mean, obviously it's nothing that is on Jarris Walker's mind on the day-to-day, but to be able to be the poster child for a program that gets as much notoriety and is involved within the prep level as IMG Academy is pretty special. And then, yeah, I mean, he mentioned that Larry Johnson comp of when he walked in as an 8th grader.
That's a great visual, right?
It is a beautiful visual to the point that stayed with Jarris Walker to this point in time. A lot of different mock draft sites, most notably The Ringer, have used that player comp for him. Again, however much you dabble in that or not, we have a discussion like that every year of what's the real value
I
of
think
player
that writer's
comps.
based in Florida too, so that makes sense.
Yeah, so it's just funny.
Yeah. No, I think Pacer fans are going to really like what Jarris is able to contribute to this team. And the first opportunity to see him and some of these young Pacers like Ben Shepherd, the other first-round pick will be on Saturday, July 8th. And a little sense of humor, I think, by the NBA. The first game comes against the Washington Wizards. So you'll get to see him go against the team that technically drafted him. It's all an awkward thing. And this is something I previewed going into the draft, that be prepared. You need to read up and make sure you know who's drafting where, because it's utterly confusing. And still is. I had casual fans like, wait, who is this Belay? Is that who No, they did not draft him.
Yeah.
The Pacers basically got 2 second-round picks, along with saving on some money on drafting Jarris at 8 instead of 7, all for doing what they wanted to do ultimately. But yeah, that'll be fun. Are you going to be out in Vegas? Have you decided just yet?
I don't think so.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean,
you got to, man.
I know.
If you can.
I know. I want to get back out there, but
it remains one of my probably my favorite NBA event each year, because it's essentially the NBA convention.
Right. Exactly. No.
Anybody within the league, with teams, players, coaches. I'm Tyrese Halliburton. I guarantee will be out there. And you may not know this, but before the summer league team maybe practices or plays later in the day, any of the main guys, talking, Miles Turner, Tyrese, that are out there, they'll probably go through a workout in the morning with the Pacers coaches. That's in large part why they go out. They also are there to show up and support their new teammates and get to know them a little bit and see their games. But the one thing I heard a lot about was Tyrese and O'Shea Brissett, in particular, playing every morning pickup against the Toronto Raptors guys that were all in town. So you never know. It's just so much fun running into agents.
Yeah.
Manager, everybody within the NBA, broadcasters, everybody's out there for 10 days.
It's a great time. As Scott mentioned, it's very well put. It is the NBA's convention and a great opportunity to be able to not only go out there and see the young stars tomorrow, but also be able to, as Scott mentioned, kind of bump shoulders with the rest of the league. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we'll have more on where the Pacers go from free agency now that the draft is behind them. Plus, speaking of Summer League, Beau, Estes, one of the heads of the Sports Business Classroom out there in Las Vegas, as well as the voice of NBA.com's Top 10 and a frequent contributor on NBA TV, will join us as we keep looking ahead towards the countdown to NBA free agency on The Fan.
The Fan.
Welcome back into the Fan Midday Show with Jimmy Cook and Eddie Garrison. I'm Scott Agnes. One of the interesting trends, Jimmy, at the top of the draft, looking back to last Thursday night, was how many non-college basketball players were taken.
In the top 5, 2001 was the last time you had that many outside of the college ranks go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
In the top 7, just 2. Brandon Miller at 2 from Alabama, and Anthony Black at 6 from Arkansas. Otherwise, you had a wide array of options here represented. 2 from the league overseas that Victor played in, Metropolitans 92. You had a G League Ignite, and then you had the Thompson twins from Overtime Elite. I was a little surprised how much hype or love Overtime Elite got, because I'm still not sure what to make of it. I think we need to see how these Thompson twins look this first year. Also, were they kind of brought in to be the faces of the program to try to build it up? And then we'll see what it looks like. I think I still need more info there. In terms of the G League Ignite, if you ask anybody about that team, I think it's mostly been a failure. The team is not competitive. They play like 12 games a year. It does give them an opportunity to solely focus on basketball, to solely play NBA competition. From a competitive standpoint, out of the G League Showcase, they were losing by 20 and 30 points. And this was, they're also having players in and out of the lineup and those sorts of things. The other thing here to consider, yes, you do get paid decently compared to maybe an NIL package you could get for the same money. But there's no branding in terms of, I don't think most people watching the draft at least your casual fans, had much idea about Scoot Henderson, his game. I bet they couldn't pick him out of one of 5 players out on the stage. And I think that's a real challenge. There's a lot of people that in turn made it difficult, Jimmy, in terms of recognizing these players when you start at the top of the draft, and 5 of the top 7, outside of maybe Victor, there's not a lot of familiarity with for the casual fans.
Look, the NBA has made this bet for themselves, which is that over the last couple of CBAs, they've made it clear that they have no interest in changing their straight-up high school rule. Yep. They want that still in place. They want you to be a year removed from your senior year of high school, and then you can go ahead and join the NBA draft. In the past, perhaps it's, go play overseas or go figure out your own path, or just go to college for a year. But now, with that indecision to change it, the NBA waited a little bit too long to start their own G League program. It allowed other pathways like Overtime Elite, even though they're still relatively new on the block, but it allowed these other avenues to take shape to where it's not just 2 pathways. It's not college or G League. It's college, G League, Overtime Elite, still the overseas path. They've yet to quantify an area and a major selling point where if you are not going to college, you are coming to the G League. That's what they wanted that to be. And for Overtime Elite, until the NBA modifies its rules, you're right, we need to see the Thompson twins prove it, but they are officially the first to market in terms of, we are now a part of this conversation for young high schoolers to go with us after your senior year, and we'll get you to the NBA. I don't view the Thompson twins as a knock against them in terms of, what did they really do with Overtime Elite? Because, they were basically exhibitions. We had Seth Greenberg on, he mentioned that. But, exhibition versus getting walloped by journeymen or multiple different players that are on 2 ways in the G League, I don't see the massive gap in terms of what was available to both these sections from a development standpoint, and that's a problem for the NBA. The G League Ignite should be the clear and obvious path of, this is where you should go for your best shot of making the league. And I'm not saying it hasn't been that, but it hasn't had the type of success and takeoff I think they envisioned it would.
Yeah, what percent of basketball fans do you think watched one G League game?
One G League game or one G League Ignite game?
I am saying one G League game. What percentage of Pacer fans watched one Mad Ants game last year?
I bet it's a very small number, but I bet if you company the G League and don't just make it G League Night, it's probably slightly higher.
Yeah.
Because there's crazy fans out there, right? Like there are. Like you view that, some people view, and that's what the G League wants to be, as a developmental system, a minor league system like it is in baseball. That hasn't quite reached those heights yet, starting to more and more with the 2-way deals. But yeah, Scott, it's a very low number. I would ask the same question though. How many people, not highlights, not clips on overtime.com, how many people have watched Overtime Elite games?
Half of whatever you think for the G League.
Correct.
And here's my bigger issue with Overtime Elite is, this is why being there in person, I think, is critical for an overtime elite game for the scouts, because you can't I don't know what to make of the stats.
Yeah.
Right? Asar Thompson named 2-time MVP the last 2 years. What does that mean in context of the competition he's playing against each night in practice? Those sorts of things. I have no doubt they could have that improvement individually when you're focused on basketball almost entirely, less school, those sorts of things. But those stats, it's hard to compare. And that's another wrench in all this that those that get paid to do this year-round have to be able to figure out.
We're going to take a quick break. When we return, Beau Estes of NBA.com and NBA TV's Top 10 will join us. We'll get Beau's takeaway from the Pacers draft. We'll take a trip down to Houston as well and also get you set for NBA Summer League and NBA Free Agency with Beau Estes of NBA.com on The Fan. Welcome back to the Fan Midday Show with Scott Agnes. I am Jimmy Cook. Eddie Garrison with us as well. Continue our Pacers and NBA at large conversation with our next guest. You know him on his frequent stops on NBA TV as a contributor, as well as the voice of NBA.com's Top 10 and a major player, one of the department heads over there for the Sports Business Classroom at NBA Summer League. He is Beau Estes, nice enough to make some time with us. How you doing today, my friend?
I'm doing well, man. Getting ready for Sports Business Classroom and Summer League, as you mentioned. I hear that Victor Wembanyama is going to get a little bit of attention there, so we're trying to prepare ourselves, Jimmy, as you might imagine.
I understand it's a sellout already for Sports Business Classroom. Is that correct?
Our friend Albert Hall has a smile from ear to ear right now. I'll just say that much.
Beau, take us through first, before we go Pacers specific. I understand that you had a live stream of the NBA draft with Sports Business Classroom. Was that the first year you guys have done that? And if so, what was that whole process like, getting to have that exercise while also providing that content out there on draft night?
Well, as you might imagine, 4 hours live on a draft is a lot of work. I hosted Dan Purcell, who I know you're familiar with and your listeners are familiar with, was a contributor on that. He's a former executive with the New Orleans Pelicans, and Eric Pincus, who everybody knows. He's a CBA expert and more, works with Bleacher Report, worked with us some at NBA TV. He was a part of it. But the real thrust of it, Jimmy, all our students that go through Sports Business Classroom, the ones that went into scouting, they became experts on particular prospects. They put together the film, and when that player was drafted, we allowed them to do the analysis, and we teed them up. So it was a lot of fun, and it was a good way to showcase the skills that these students learned at Summer League and Sports Business Classroom.
Joined by Beau Estes here on the Fan Midday Show. Beau, I'm curious in terms of the development of those individuals, those students really trying to make it in the NBA. Have you seen maybe an emergence of one niche more than the other, whether it's analytics, whether it's, GM's the obvious one, but what specific role has maybe taken a greater importance to your students?
I think analytics does very well because there's a lot of call for that, and it's a new call for that. So we place a lot of students with NBA teams and G League teams and WNBA teams in analytics roles. But, we have a couple of G League GMs that sprang from our program. So there are those folks. There's folks that go into teams as far as salary cap folks. We've got those folks with, I believe, the Boston Celtics, Sacramento Kings, and more. There's a lot of folks that go work for agents to be caps experts. So there's a lot of jobs on those two fronts. I run the media and broadcasting program. The last 2 years, our producers for the student producers, one got a job on ESPN NBA and one got a job at a Las Vegas production company out there doing some betting content. So we've got students all over the place with a ton of success. We put a ton of work into it, and we're really proud of what they're doing.
But when you look back at the draft, we'll start big picture first outside of the Pacers. What stood out to you the most once the obvious selection of Victor Wembanyama was made, but also the Shams Charania-driven drama that was Brandon Miller and Scoot Henderson at 2-3?
Well, I'll tell you this. At the start of the night, Eric Pincus said the team to watch is the Portland Trailblazers. He was most interested in who they would pick, what they would do if Brandon Miller went to Charlotte, as he did. And look, they went with Scoot Henderson. So I think that was the drama that we were following. And then the Thompson twins going 4 and 5 was sort of a stunner. And then, I think Dan Purcell kept noting how quickly and how far Cam Whitmore dropped all the way down to 20. And, those injury whispers grow around a prospect, and that momentum starts to develop with his decline. But I think he landed in a pretty interesting spot in Houston, along with Amin Thompson and that young team out there. It's a pretty perfect spot for him.
And Beau, with that, you're seeing a situation now with Whitmore and the Thompson twin are going to be able. They were able to get Whitmore at 20, a guy that I think probably 3 weeks ago was penciled in right there at that top spot for them. So an incredible draft for them. Now it's about managing and developing that young talent because they have a lot of it, and there's only so many roles there.
Well, think about it. They've got, Amin Thompson. They've got Cam Whitmore. They've got Jalen Green, who's a scoring machine, although, inefficient, obviously. They got Jabari from last year. There's just so much talent on Houston. And of all those people that I'm mentioning, I don't even know that I'm talking about the most talented player on that roster. So I just think that, when you look at Alperen Şengün and the way that he can set up those guys, that's a young team to watch. They're not going to win a championship next year or anything like that. But it's a young team to watch for the future. And like you mentioned, what do we do with all of this young talent? Who plugs in well where? Is the questions that will keep the Houston Rockets organization up at night trying to figure out a good answer to that.
Beau, the Thompson twins are very much a piece of proof of concept, if you will, of Overtime Elite and whether or not that's a pathway that can work. Now, given the fact that they've only been, in existence in that form for a year or two, it makes it, they're licking their chops already knowing that they have all this exposure and they have had not just one but two players go in the top 5. Beau, when you take a temperature check of the entirety of pathways for kids out of high school to go to the draft, where does G League Ignite, if at all, react to this? And is Overtime Elite now an accepted pathway, or does it very much rely on what the Thompson twins are able to do at the next level?
Yeah, I think it's an accepted pathway if it works. If you get drafted, it's an accepted pathway. I think that, there are several different ways to go now. College used to be the primary and preferred way, but, even look, I worked for the NBL over in Australia, and the Next Stars program has had players through. In fact, the Indiana Pacers drafted a next stars guy, Mojave King. So, yeah, there's guys that make it from all over the world in different ways. And if you make it, I think it's accepted. You're right on, like, let's see, what their level is when they get to the NBA, how they have to adjust. All those preparation things are important, but I think right now we're seeing an entirely new system and situation in place than what I grew up with and what I understood. And, for the players, in a lot of cases, I think it's just better.
Beau, you did mention Mojave King, and this is a guy that went pro, I think, as like a 16-year-old, as foreigners often do. I mean, we saw that with Bojan Bogdanovic, Domantas Sabonis here locally when they played here. Any insight, anything you can share with our audience about what type of game he has and what he might look like down the road when he puts it all together?
I think down the road is the key with him. He had some moments with Cans in the NBL where I thought, boy, he's got a lot of skill. But when you get to the NBA, a lot of skill goes some distance, but the holes in your game get exposed. And I think he may have a few holes in his game that need to be tightened up. And he'll have time now in Indiana because he's not, their top pick. He's not a first-round pick. So he'll have space to grow. But I think, I've seen his shot. His shot form looks okay. He has reasonable athleticism. So there's going to be some things that he has that are of value for the Indiana Pacers, and they'll look into, but don't expect an immediate star.
Beau Estes with us, covers the NBA as a correspondent for NBA TV and the voice of the NBA.com Top 10. Beau, in a perfect world, not speaking for the league, but speaking from your viewpoint, in a perfect world, is G League Ignite at the forefront of alternate college path for U.S. players? And if so, what is your feeling of, as you mentioned, seeing so many different pathways team or players can go, just focusing on stateside products with that question?
Yeah, that's the key, is it's a stateside situation. I think, there is some advantages to that. And what I would say is that if you get into an NBA situation, and, G League Ignite is not the same as some of the other situations, but I think you have some safety, I guess is a way I'll put it, is in that you have the people that are overseeing that organization have some responsibility to the G League, and I just think it's safer in that way. But I don't know that I'm just not sold on anything being preferred at this point. I'm not sold on anything being done at this point. I feel like there's just so much more that needs to shake out before we get a preferred path.
Yeah, I would agree. I don't think there's any clarity in that other than the fact that there are now options. And on top of that, if you go to college, there's the real NIL opportunity, depending on if the elite type of program and what type of player you are within that system. You're seeing Oscar Tshiebwe, I think it is, from UK. Could have been a second-round pick last year, went back, got a good NIL deal, ultimately came out of it this year and is now signing just a two-way deal with the Pacers upcoming. I also think back to like 15 years ago, a player like him or Zach Edey or Trace Jackson Davis. Those guys would have been top 10 picks in the way players were valued back then.
Absolutely. As well as like Armando Bacot at North Carolina couldn't take the pay cut to go from Chapel Hill Star to I hope I get a two-way deal. Exactly. I really hope he can't take that pay cut. And you're right. The game is so much different. You have to be a versatile big now. You have to be able to shoot a little bit outside. You have to be able to cover a beat or two on a pick and roll. And some of these guys, I mentioned Armando Bacot. He struggles with that. So stick in college and keep that NIL money as long as you can. That's the good advice that many players in that regard receive. That we've got 25-year-old college players coming up this season. What's the kid's name from Alabama? Javon Quiverly, who's transferred, I believe his name. He's going to be 25 years old next season. That's incredible. You think of the age that the Pacers' first pick is. He's 19 years old, and this guy's 6 years older than him. He's still going to be in college next year. It's incredible.
Beau, to build off of what Scott mentioned regarding the way the league has changed and valuing specific players, focusing on big men the last 10 to 15 years, Zach Edey makes that decision after testing the waters heavily out of Purdue to come back. Obviously, NIL was involved there, but he decided that his best path was still another year at Purdue. When you look at Trace Jackson Davis going late very late in the draft, towards the back end of the second round, as Scott mentioned, Oscar Tshiebwe being an undrafted two-way player. Mm-hmm. But then I look at, there's guys like Cody Zeller that are still in the league, even though they're clinging like they're still there. Is there a true pathway for the traditional big in this new format of the NBA? Or are they pretty much doomed to either overseas play or two-way deals that maybe find you on a roster spot every now and again in the league?
Yeah, it's tough, man. It really is. I mean, like when you say traditional big men, I'm almost thinking like Moses Malone.
Right.
And going down, like a guy down low who's going to get every rebound and every bucket 4 feet from the hole. If you pass it into him, you're never getting it back out. That's just the way it goes. It's tough for a guy like that to make it now. It's just, you're not as desired as a guy who can float around and maybe operate off pick and roll, maybe make a pass after you receive it off a pick and pop. All those things that you need to do now, I don't think of a traditional big man doing. So I think it's tougher for those guys to make it in the league. They get cooked on switches. I think there is a place maybe for them, but it's deep roster. It really is. I don't know that that's a guy that's going to be a featured component. Even look at, let's say the guy who has the most traditional big man skills is Joel Embiid. That's not all he has.
Right.
He has so much more than just that. So I just think you have to bring more to the table now, and that's the way that the league is refereed. That's the way that the league is played. I just think that, it incentivizes guys who can do a little bit of everything.
Joined now by Beau Estes of NBA and NBA.com. And, Beau, I want to get down a wormhole a little bit that I'm sure you never answered any questions about whatsoever. And that's kind of being the top 10 guy. First of all, what is it like having that honor? And can you take us behind the scenes of your process? Say this was a Monday night slate of games. You have 12 games. What is it like in the evening where you got to hammer out all these probably 2-minute quick updates and summaries? And nowadays, I talk to kids, 15 and younger, and this is how they consume the league more than anything. Yeah. It's these top 10 clips. It's highlights of every games. So you're really making an impact and heard by a big audience.
Well, it's wild. I was just doing a conference with students from around the world, and, my name came up, and I think maybe some people recognized, but as soon as I started talking, you start to see people's eyes like, oh, okay, I know who this is. It's amazing to me because, again, I came up in the 80s and 90s to think that this is a league that is now seen and heard around the world, and the impact we're having is such a real treat for me personally. My process on a given night, if it's a 12-game night, boy, that's even tougher, because we have to have eyes on each and every game. So we're all looking at every single game and trying to find what are the best 2 or 3 plays from each game. I, on Twitter, will send out an alert. Send me your nominees for the top 10 plays. And then, so as it develops, guys, what happens is, let's say third quarter of the West Coast games, I start to have an idea of what some of the plays are going to be. And so in my mind, I can start thinking about what I want to say for each one. And if somebody hit a 50-foot buzzer beater to win the game, I know that's number one, right? There's just no doubt about it. And from there, look, I'll get the top 10 really quick after the last game ends. And my job is to turn that around in 10 minutes. So I don't have time to write anything down. I don't have time to really sketch out anything. It's a 2.5-minute clip. I will look at it once. I will think in whatever pops into my head to say, I tend to say, even if it risks my job, I probably will say it. And then, I just roll with it. I turn it right around and send it out. And my advantage is I've probably called more highlights, NBA highlights, than anybody alive. So I can just do it now. It's like a gear in your car. I just put it in that gear and my brain starts going. But yeah, it's a real joy. I'm lucky to have the job, and the impact that top 10 has made has been wonderful for my career and my life. And I just appreciate everybody that listens to it. It means the world to me.
The one challenge I foresee, though, is those teams out west. Those are the teams that oftentimes produce the best and most frequent highlights, right? Golden State, you got to include the Lakers, Sacramento now. So you got to really be waiting until the very end of the night.
He's fixed that now.
You guys, think about it. You guys will understand this. Think you're a young producer, and you've got your top 10 lined up, and then Steph hits a 40-foot buzzer beater, and you're just thrown into re-edit mode like crazy.
Exactly.
At that moment. So they have to redo every single thing about what they've worked on. And you're right. You have to watch till the bitter end because many, many times the number one play of the night has been the last play on the last West Coast game. So you just have to be open to that happening and be ready to change on the fly. And, that delays our process a little bit, obviously, but it is what it is. We make it work. And we want to produce the best possible product. That's issue number one for us. And if we can tackle that, we've done our job.
I don't want to take too much weight off your crossbow, but to be clear, I feel like, if I'm not mistaken, you're out west now. So for you, it's an 8 o'clock finish instead of an 11 o'clock when you were out in Atlanta, right?
I feel like I screwed up so bad by operating at Turner Sports for 25 years in Atlanta, Georgia. Out west, it is so much easier to cover the NBA. It's so much easier. You're getting done earlier. And, guys, I lived in Maui for a month and change one time and covered the NBA from out there. It's even easier the further west you go. I mean, there's really an idea where we all should be living out in Maui and doing this NBA gig. I'll be honest with you. It's fantastic.
As we've seen the Summer League year over year now, Beau, I feel like, rightfully so, injury concerns, watching out for the franchise stars. You only see so often the top players really get consecutive game action. I know Victor Wembanyama said that he was going to participate in Summer League. He skips FIBAs now, which I don't blame him, to focus on his rookie season. How much, if at all, do you think we see some of the top players like Wembanyama, like Scoot Henderson, like Brandon Miller out there in Las Vegas in a couple weeks?
Well, I think each team has a different approach. I remember seeing a little clip from Wembanyama a week ago that was just sort of caught in a casual moment where somebody asked him if he's going to play in Summer League, and his exact quote was, "a little bit." I hope he plays a little bit in each game. I really do. If he can give us, 15 minutes in each game, that would be fantastic. But I understand the San Antonio Spurs position here. You're coming off a year where you saw Chet Holmgren lose an entire season in a game that didn't matter. So I think San Antonio will be very conservative, but I do think we'll see him. You remember a couple of years ago, Jimmy, Zion Williamson goes out and gets injured at halftime of this first game, and that's it.
Caused an earthquake.
So,
Yeah.
An earthquake happened that night, and we don't know if he caused it. Maybe he did. So that's the way it goes. I hope we see Victor Wembanyama. I would imagine we'd see more of a guy like Scoot, who's built like an NFL running back, who looks like he can take all the contact in the world. I wouldn't be surprised to see a bit more of him, and I bet he'll be really exciting. Brandon Miller, we'll see. But I look forward to seeing all these guys and some of the stories of folks that are, overseas and trying to make it back to the NBA. That's a lot of fun too.
Well, I think I'd be surprised if Victor plays more than 2 games. I think you'll for sure see him 1 because the NBA did it brilliantly on that first night, right? We get a beautiful pairing of Victor versus Scoot in night 1, and then I think it's the Thompson twins after that squaring off, and those will be nationally on ESPN. So you showcase that. You got a big momentum going into the weekend, but even the other first-round picks, like the Pacers' Jarris Walker, guys like that usually play no more than 3 of the 5 games.
Yeah, no, you shut them down. You really do. I think they want to see what we've got in this guy. I think we want to see how does he take coaching, how does he play in a team environment at this level, because like I just mentioned a minute ago, there's going to be some men from overseas that are going to be there. So you're going to take contact like you haven't taken contact before, but I don't think you want to exert them too much. And you remember last year, Paolo Banchero right away, great, knocking it out of the park. And Jabari Smith, what's going on here? Like, he wasn't as good. And so I think there's a little bit of that, too. Like, how is he responding mentally? And we don't want to get him into a bad place. So there's all of that that goes into these decisions. But I think item number 1, particularly with Victor Wembanyama, and so much, not just in San Antonio, but in the league riding on him, let's be careful with him. Let's make sure he's healthy. Let's get him to training camp well, and we'll roll from there.
Beau, I know that you're focused all around the league, and obviously you're prepped for a sports business classroom and the entirety of what Summer League brings to the table. But when we look locally at the Pacers and we have these conversations nationally on them, there appears to be a lot of optimism for the roster they are constructing. But again, they're on the path to perhaps a playoff spot next year, getting into that play-in next year, hopefully out of this rebuild process. As you look at the pieces they have here in Indiana, when you look at Tyrese Halliburton, when you looked at Benedict Mathurin, Jarris Walker coming in now, Miles Turner, what do you envision for this team next season, and how does adding somebody of Jarris Walker, you talk about freak specimen, how does it help them bringing him in, pairing him up in the front court with Miles Turner?
Well, I'll start here. I feel like I said this every time I'm on with you, Jimmy. Expectations for Pacers fan is key. I don't think they're winning the championship next year. I really don't.
Beau, come on now.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I'm breaking some news here. I don't think they're going to win the championship. But yeah, so like Tyrese Halliburton is a star, borderline superstar, and if he's healthy, he's sort of got some all NBA possibilities with him. So you start there, and that's a really good start because he is the head of the snake down there or up there in Indiana. So I think that's a great start. You know, when you talk about Jarris Walker, I've seen some comparisons that I really like. I saw Aaron Gordon a little bit, and I saw Larry Johnson, and I see a bit of both in his game. He's really strong. He's really physical, and again, just 19 years old and able to handle a little bit, the one dribble, the two dribbles in half court, I think really helps. He takes contact incredibly well. I don't think he's a great shooter, and I don't know that he's ever going to be a great shooter. You look at his free throw percentage from college, 66%. That, you know, I talked to Seth Partnow. He does analytics at Sports Business Classroom. And when you're below 70% on free throw shooting, it's hard to, you know, there's not many cases where a guy scales up to be a great three-point shooter. If he's a decent enough three-point shooter, that's good enough. But, you know, the pieces that Indiana has in place, I could see a 6 seed in an optimistic setting. I could see maybe even a 5 seed. But, you know, look, in the Eastern Conference, 1, Milwaukee, 2, Boston, 3, Philly. That's pretty solid to me. I think Cleveland's really good. So I just think that there are some spots that are tough to beat out. But in that next group, I could see Indiana ascending into that sort of area pretty easily.
Beau, last question before I let you go. Free agency is on the horizon. When you look at this class, but also for the first time in his career, the rumblings are louder than ever about Damian Lillard and whether or not he'll actually be on the move. What are you focused on, and what are you tracking the most in your eyes with free agency on the horizon?
I mean, I think you're right. I think Damian Lillard is interesting because they drafted a player that is very similar to him in Scoot Henderson, at least from a size profile and from he was a scorer first profile. So, you know, it gives them flexibility. I mean, they can try Damian Lillard and Scoot together, or they have options to go off of him. So that's the number one thing. There are other guys that are interesting to me. What's going to happen with Draymond Green? I don't think it's set in stone that he's coming back to Golden State. I really do not. So I think, you know, who values him and what he brings to the table is an interesting question as well. This is not a superstar class. It's really not. So, and with the new CBA that, frankly, guys, isn't even done yet, it's going to be interesting to see how these teams attack the new salary cap and how they put pieces together if they want to wait to see how things shake out. I'm fascinated by it, but again, to me, it's not an overwhelmingly huge year in the free agency market.
Beau, keep enjoying it out west. Have a great time at Summer League. Best of luck with the sellout over there for the Sports Business Classroom, and hope to be crossing our paths here soon, my friend.
All right, if you guys get to Vegas, come see me.
Absolutely. That's Beau Estes. Again, you can follow him on Twitter at NBA Beau, voice of NBA.com's Top 10, and a frequent contributor with NBA TV.
I love the secret you kind of made no longer a secret. Yeah, if you live on the West Coast, not too difficult.
It's beautiful. He was very happy when he made that move because it's just it. And we talk about all the time in different sporting sections. The furthest time zone I've lived in for more than a couple of months has been Chicago, and even that hour off with NFL games or NBA games is just fantastic. It helps everything from a sleep schedule standpoint. But then you go out west, and it's a whole different animal. You have the whole rest of your day, basically, even after an NFL Sunday.
See, I think Mountain Time's the best. It's the perfect middle thing.
Sure.
Because, and I experienced this during Summer League or when traveling out west and Pacers are in, California, LA, right? The trouble is, if I'm waking up at 9 a.m., there's a whole news cycle that already happened out on the East Coast from 8 a.m. to noon.
Fair.
So I feel like I'm spending the first 45 minutes catching up. However, on the plus side, I will say, is like after 10 p.m. out on the West Coast, Twitter's dead. No one's on it. That's 1 a.m. on the East Coast. So I'll find myself checking Twitter like after 30 minutes, and there's like 5 tweets.
Yeah.
That's it, because most people are in bed by that time. That's why I think that Mountain Time, that's why Denver, it's so sweet, because you kind of get the best of both worlds. You know, games are ending at like 11 p.m., and you're up at a reasonable hour and not always playing catch-up.
Well, if you're a Pacers fan out west, that's why you're subscribed to Fieldhouse Files.
There
so
you go.
Get that newsletter and you get your rundown, so you didn't miss anything in the East Coast time zone.
There you go. Please appreciate the plug.
Happy to do what I can. Of course, you can find Scott's work as well on 1075thefan.com. Like Beau mentioned, not the most star-studded list for free agents, not the deepest class that it's been, but there are a couple names out there. We'll look at potential fits for the Pacers and how much money they might be willing to spend. We come back here on the Fan Midday Show, plus a real deep dive into the cap space the Pacers have. How much perceived value is there really compared to the rest of the NBA? Keith Smith will stop by a little bit at the top of the 2 o'clock hour, take us through that entire process, and talk about what Beau mentioned, and Scott's hammered it home as well. The CBA still very much waiting for its true finalization, how it's going to impact teams moving forward. More on NBA free agency and how it impacts the Pacers, though, on the other side.
The Fan.
That was Tim McMahon joining Brian Windhorst in the Hoop Collective podcast. A really good one if you haven't checked that out. But Tim McMahon knows Rick Carlisle and the Mavericks very well. He's on that beat down in Dallas, covered him for 13 years. It was Tim McMahon who broke the news that Rick Carlisle was becoming the Pacers head coach. But at the same time, also not too surprising because of the familiarity with Harrison Barnes and Rick Carlisle. That's one big thing that I took note. I mentioned Harrison in my story last week. I think Harrison is the guy they're after, Jimmy. On top of that, a couple of the players they checked in on last week was in Brooklyn. They were really trying to swing a deal. Oh, another former Maverick, Dorian Finney-Smith. Oh, that's convenient. The other guy was Tobias Harris in Philly. They checked in on DeAndre Hunter down in Atlanta. I don't know this personally, but a rumored player also was Jonathan Kuminga with Golden State. I don't see that fit as much. I think that's more of a reach because we don't know what he is. And to me, you're really trying to fill one of those last roster spots here with a small forward that you know exactly what he is. He's defensive-minded, and you know what you're going to bring. But your thoughts about what Tim McMahon had to share about Harrison Barnes, who's 31, is an unrestricted free agent coming from Sacramento, who, by the way, spent time with Tyrese Halliburton and Buddy Hield out there. So there's more than just the Carlisle connection.
We were just discussing and having a hard time solidifying what a second unit is going to look like for this Pacers team.
Yep.
There's a position of need in a handful of different spots, but if you could get somebody that you're able to flex around a bit at the 3 and the 4, obviously primarily the 3 with Barnes at this point in time in his career, but I don't hate it. I mean, I want a splash of some kind. It doesn't have to be a starting level splash, but just we like where the roster's at, but we want to further speed this process along and feel like we can legitimately be in that. Beau said as high as 5. I've said as high as maybe 4 for really being super idealistic or optimistic about what the Pacers could do next season. Barnes, to his credit, through now this will be his 12th NBA season, has only been under 35% from 3 one time, and that was in his 3rd season in the league. So look, I like it. I do. But it's one of those things now, though, where, and this is just the way my brain works sometimes, sure. Now that you hear everybody talking about it as, oh, this is the perfect fit, this is the perfect fit, is it really actually something the Pacers are truly interested in?
Absolutely. I think so, yeah. It's something to pay attention to. Absolutely. I was surprised, as I mentioned in the first hour of the show here on the Fan Midday, that I was surprised they weren't quite able to swing something before the draft. I don't know what it would have cost them, but I thought the Dorian Finney-Smith thing was something they were really trying to swing. That ultimately did not happen, so it opens them up here. And right now, you sign Jarius Walker. Yes, you also will sign Ben Shepherd. Then you just have one true roster spot available if you don't send out anybody. And so that's another reason, too, why I think it's more likely than not that they make a deal coming up.
If they did make a deal with Harrison Barnes, who does that push out?
You got it. That would, to me, you need to just clear out a center and a shooting guard, meaning that Daniel Tice, Jalen Smith, Isaiah Jackson, and then one of Buddy Hield, probably Chris Duarte. But Buddy Hield's on the last end of a contract. You should not expect the Pacers to do an extension with him this summer. I think they need to see what he looks like, especially if he comes off the bench and tweaks his role a little bit. Is he comfortable with that? How does he play in that role? It's unfortunate. Chris had just a bad break of luck all last season. Kyle Lowry stepped on his foot. Then he came back and had tweaked that ankle once more. I only felt like he played 20, 30 games. I think he ultimately played like 55. It didn't feel that way, and I think in large part, Jimmy, that was because he was kind of out of the rotation, really trying to find his feel with this team and this new crop of players that were involved in the mix.
If I'm bringing in Barnes, I completely agree with you of what should be moving. It would be likely Duarte and likely
Daniel Tice?
Yeah, something like that, perhaps, that would go to a team where for Duarte, and you could throw Tice in the mix for this as well, when Duarte was first going through the pre-draft process a couple of years ago and people were trying to map out where he could end up, a lot of people pointed to a handful of different contenders towards the middle, the back end of the draft if he fell there, because of the fact that he was, in theory, a ready-made pro prospect because he'd been in college for so long and his skill set as a shooter that he would gel right in there. So I'm looking at, again, you'd be signing Barnes in free agency, and then perhaps you're looking at shipping off Tice and Duarte to a team that either is trying to add depth or would try to add a piece that could potentially work into their contributors off the bench in a playoff run.
The two teams I know for a fact really wanted him on draft night a couple of years ago was the team right behind the Pacers, Golden State, who ended up with Moses Moody, Moses.
There you go.
That's classic Kendrick Perkins.
Little Perk, yep.
Yes. Was Golden State. They badly wanted him, and so did the New York Knicks. They were trying to trade 2 first-round picks to move up to that 13th spot and get Chris Duarte. I know the Knicks had a couple of scouts. So did the Warriors, I think, midway through the year at Gainbridge Fieldhouse to try to see what Duarte looked like, to try to see how he was gelling, how things were going, quite frankly, with his role with the team. Nothing really materialized. I think his trade value decreased just because of his lack of production and lack of a role after really Matherin came in and Buddy took his game to another level. And then, of course, Tyrese, his usage rate going up and his efficiency going up as well. And so I don't see Chris Duarte as an odd man out, but I would see him as a guy other teams would like, and he's a little bit expendable because of what they have just done. And most recently, that's adding a similar type 3-and-D player in Ben Shepherd in the draft.
In previous days of free agency in years past, when you're looking at like a Monday before free agency starts and you're examining everything, we always come back to the conversation of, well, you have big-time free agents or at least big-name, high-dollar value free agents that might dictate or handicap how aggressive some teams can be because they're so honed in or zeroed in on a particular player. You think of guys like Russell Westbrook or what James Harden's going to do, or Kyrie Irving. Again, there's different values for each of those players. I'm just using them because they're at the top of the list of unrestricted free agents at this point in time. The Pacers, if you're looking for it as a benefit or glass half full angle, don't have to worry about that necessarily because they're not trying to retain one of their own at such a high evaluation where they're having to wait and see how everything else plays out. But with those other names that are going to be towards bigger teams, how, if at all, does that impact not just the Pacers, but the entirety of this free agency this year compared to years past in your mind with what this class is?
Yeah, in terms of the draft class?
The free agent class, because we often see teams just waiting.
Right. There's not someone of LeBron's, Steph, KD's caliber. It's James Harden, really, is that top tier, I think.
And Kyrie's probably in that. Not. You know what I mean? Like,
kind of.
To the point that a contender, in theory, would still be trying to allocate assets and measure him as a potential piece.
The reality is the teams that would be interested, like the Lakers, I don't think they have the money to sign him straight up.
Yeah, it'd have to be
they could, but it'd be like a league minimum.
Yes.
Or $5 million.
Something that's not going to happen, yeah.
Yeah, like unless Kyrie is good with taking a pay cut, which it doesn't seem to be all the case, because why did he want out of Brooklyn ultimately? Well, no one knows exactly for sure.
No one knows many of the spots he wanted out of.
What the big picture seemed like was because no team, in particular Brooklyn, was willing to commit, rightfully so, like more than a year or two. Like, I think it would be wrong for any team to, let's say, offer Kyrie a 4-year max deal. I don't think I would offer him a 2-year max deal without a team option, and you're not getting that. So it seems like for Kyrie, that's why I kind of still pencil him in with Dallas, just because they kind of need each other, even if it's not a great fit. But I think it's James Harden. Draymond Green would be the next one, because if you're a team like Sacramento, and right now they would have enough cap space to sign him for, say, $30 million. What player now wouldn't want to necessarily jump in and go to Sacramento? Mike Brown, great coach, good with relationships, and they have a team that's not just now built for the playoffs, but maybe a player could see themselves as the missing link, the missing player that could help put that team over the top. But in terms of what you're looking at for the Pacers and free agent forwards, I'm not talking about trades, but free agents, I'm not sure about Kyle Kuzma. I think P.J. Washington would be an interesting candidate with Charlotte. He's a guy that's done well, been productive, earned that salary that he earned with Charlotte, but the Hornets aren't going anywhere.
Yeah,
I think that's a team that's poised. I would remake it entirely. I know probably Charlotte doesn't feel this way, but I'd get rid of LaMelo, try to maximize what you can there. But if you get rid of him, you kind of lose a lot of your relevancy. But Miles Bridges is a player the Pacers were seriously considering last offseason, but then the alleged, what is it, domestic violence, I think it was domestic battery, happened with him like a day before the start of free agency, which, by the way, comes up on Friday. So it is at the end of this week. We are getting closer. We put the draft in the rearview mirror, and now you're looking forward to free agency. I think P.J. Washington and Harrison Barnes would probably be the first two that I think of. Grant Williams comes to mind as well, but I don't like that fit as much. I've never been a big Grant Williams guy, so do I want to commit $20 million per year to him? No, not really. And the other thing that you could consider, Jimmy, and I think we talked about this briefly last hour, I wonder if the Pacers do a J.J. Redick deal. And what I mean by that is you sign one of these veterans to a substantial deal that's like 2 years, or even 1 year deal with a team option in year 2, something like $25 million for Harrison Barnes. Probably above what he's looking for or will be able to get. I don't know. We'll see. A 31-year-old small forward.
Overpay for a knee, but not of the long-term variety.
And do it in the short term because you can, because right now your books allow that to happen. You can see right away the impact he'll be able, the familiarity with Rick Carlisle, plus the comfort with Tyrese Halliburton and Buddy Hield. I talked to Buddy Hield about his routine in terms of gamely and his wind down and icing and hot tub, all that. Where did he get that? Harrison Barnes. He was kind of his vet. And so if Buddy is taking a liking to that, a guy that's all in on basketball, surely you could love the trickle-down effect that could happen.
Of all the names you mentioned, and I know me and Eddie disagree on this slightly, I wouldn't necessarily be mad about it, but I saw enough, particularly his final 2 years in LA, of Kyle Kuzma being called upon as a starting small forward in this league, where and that's a championship caliber team at that point in LA. I know it's different here with where the expectations are right now, but it would have to be a perfect deal in terms of both money and years that I'd be willing to allocate when, even though he's looked good at Washington at times, he's the best player on a Wizards team that, again, hasn't amounted to much the last 2 or 3 years. I think if the role was right, maybe that's an area you fall back on, but at this point, I'm more with you on if they could only have one of the two, I would almost rather acquire Barnes at this point for a 2-year window or so
I would agree.
than I would Kyle Kuzma for 4.
Yeah, if it's Kyle Kuzma, it's going to be something 3 or 4 year deal you would surely expect. By the way, this just in from Woj here. John Collins is finally being moved. I think John Collins, other than Miles Turner, has been the most rumored, speculated player in the last 4 years, it feels like, Jimmy. And so Woj says the Hawks are sending John Collins to the Jazz for Rudy Gay and a future second-round pick. So I guess he notes here they're moving. Mostly what they're doing is moving off of move. Collins' 3 years, $78 million deal, and it's widely expected and known that Atlanta has to get under the luxury tax. That's the orders of Atlanta ownership. And so that's what this is accomplishing more than anything here.
Atlanta is so interesting to me and intriguing because it feels like, even though he's a defensive liability at times, it feels like that they have, at least in their mind, a superstar piece in Trae Young, but because of the contract extension to Collins and where they're at, they are struggling to figure out how they're going to build around him. But we're still able to, again, they're a spot that you just don't want your team to be in, right? They have a great player in Young, but their ceiling, or they've been knocking on the door the last couple of years outside of that playoff win in New York a couple years ago, is bottom of the Eastern Conference standings, being a part of that 7 to 8 range of the play-in. And that's after a handful of years spent in the lottery. I mean, that's just not, when you look at this Pacers rebuild and you look around the Eastern Conference, I don't want to end up like that team, and I don't think they will because they're constructed differently. It's Atlanta right now when I look at the Eastern Conference and where things are structured as it stands.
I'm very fascinated by the way, the collective bargaining agreement and what that looks like. Because right now, teams don't just have it quite yet. They have kind of an outline. I think it's 100 pages or so of what it's supposed to look like and the way in which teams can utilize things. And one of the big draws we saw last week was the second pick exception, and that's in large part what allowed for the Golden State Warriors to draft Trayce Jackson-Davis and give him a 3-year contract for a team that is significantly over the luxury tax. Because coming up with without this second pick exception, these teams wouldn't have the money to be able to even pay for a second-round pick, and that doesn't help anyone out. Who that costs is those prospective players that are just trying to find their in with a franchise.
Still to come here on the Fan Midday Show, we're going to look at the cap space available for the Pacers and how, in general, the CBA is going to change not so much the Pacers, but the way that teams of the higher tax bill are able to navigate through things in free agency. We'll take a big picture look at that with Keith Smith coming up at the top of the 2 o'clock hour. We come back a little bit more with the Pacers as we transition to that more national picture for where things go with free agency, like Scott mentioned, at least in terms of initial negotiations, there's no tampering going on period. That is the start or unofficial start of NBA free agency here in a couple days on the Fan Midday Show.
The Fan.
Back here in the DriveHuber.com studios for the Fan Midday Show. Jimmy Cook, Scott Agnes, Eddie Garrison coming to you from the Circle. It's around that time where the Colts are far enough away from training camp where it's still this resting period, but not far enough away to not still have those conversations on where the roster construction is heading into the 2023 campaign. It's always a great read on ESPN.com, but Bill Barnwell goes through and ranks the skill position players on each roster where they were a year ago to where they are now. The Colts dropped 5 spots in his ranking to 25th. I mean, we've talked about it a lot, Scott. Some of that is weighted because Michael Pittman Jr., many thought would have yet another jump-off point this past season for his career after a solid sophomore campaign. His third year in the league does not deliver the way he wanted it to. Jonathan Taylor struggles with injuries. The offensive line was in tatters, and that's not even taking into account the coaching carousel, the coaching chaos, and the quarterback carousel that we envisioned. As you look now with that draft, many, many weeks behind us now. But again, in this interim period, is there a good enough core, good enough skill position balance, regardless if it's Anthony Richardson or Gardner Minshew under center week 1?
No, I think the Colts need more weapons. That's what I've seen that need for many years here. And the other thing we were talking about, how do you judge overtime elite players for the NBA draft? How do you judge any Colts players for their season last year? I think the one we can all agree on that was totally unacceptable and everyone needs work is that offensive line.
Yes.
And they acknowledge that as well. But I'm in particular more thinking about the weapons here. If the offensive line is struggling, how do you judge a running back? How do you judge the time that is not there for a quarterback to have some time to throw to their weapons down the field? And that brings in Pittman Jr. right here. I think because here's where I sit. It's like I think they were all underwhelming. But how could they not be underwhelming? Yeah. You had a coach fired, replaced on an interim basis. You gave up the biggest comeback in league history. I'm not sure how to even start outside of that offensive line who all acknowledged we were not good enough.
Yeah, the only place you can really have a fair, and it's not fully fair, but a fair evaluation from a positional standpoint is on the defensive side of the ball. And even then, you also take into account the fact, well, they're having to work additional reps and extra hard because of the lack of offensive extended drives.
They were living on the field. Correct.
So and particularly at the back end of the season, again, I know that's going to be a mark that's in the highlight reel forever, but it's hard to fully get an evaluation of that Minnesota game when, again, you're asking a defense to be on the field as often as they were. I don't put as much stock in, for instance, there's only one reason that Jonathan Taylor's injuries, as we'll continue to have discussion on his contract, come into play, which is if you're the Colts and you don't like the evaluation that you're getting, maybe you're looking at his injured season last year and pointing to that and saying, hey, you just had some durability issues last season. We don't want to give you a long-term deal. Outside of that, it's hard to make an evaluation on anybody.
Yeah, and with JT, too, it felt towards the end, it was like, yeah, we don't really need you here. Like, kind of like the Pacers' last 12 games. You know what? We're thinking big picture here. Tyrese, yeah, we're going to shut you down, which I said they should have done a week earlier. But, yeah, in terms of JT and Michael Pittman Jr., and you mentioned the weapons. I'll even go to the other side of the ball. The secondary right now needs some upgrades, especially with what Isaiah Rodgers allegedly did here, betting and how that's going to impact him probably for most of next year, but we do not have a final determination just yet. This is the Fan Midday Show coming up at 2 o'clock. Keith Smith for Spotrac covers the NBA more so from a analytics and CBA and salary cap perspective. We'll get into the NBA and particularly the Pacers and what free agency could look like for them coming up this weekend. Stay tuned.
101.5 The Fan.
Welcome back into the Fan Midday Show with Jimmy Cook and Eddie Garrison. I'm Scott Agnes. 2:01 here on the Circle. Let's continue our NBA conversation. Bring in friend of the show, Keith Smith, longtime NBA writer and reporter. Currently can read his work on Spotrac and more than anything, Spot-Track. I always mess that up, Keith. But we got the new collective bargaining agreement coming up on July 1. A lot of teams, or a handful of teams, including the Pacers, have cap space. What are some of the key storylines you are tracking heading into this weekend, Keith?
Yeah, it's going to be a big summer for the NBA. I was told a few weeks ago by a handful of different people, it felt like one of those years where we're going to see one of those kind of resets of the league. Happens about every 4 or 5 years or so, where there's a bunch of trades and sometimes a lot of free agent movement. And I think we're already seeing that. We've already seen major trades, including one that's just news broke in the last 10, 15 minutes or so. John Collins headed to the Utah Jazz. So, we're in a spot where I think we're going to see a lot more of that. Probably big trades, free agent market, not so great. Not a ton of, star guys there. The ones that are out there are expected to stay. But, if you've got cap space, you can facilitate trades easier. You can go fill needs you have. So I think it's going to be a really busy, active summer.
With that reset thought in mind, Keith, in what different ways, I guess, will the new CBA impact that aspect of creativity, particularly those of teams that are past their championship window but have a ton of cap on the books and are trying to facilitate said reset deals?
Yeah, you're going to see the most expensive teams in the league start to go one way or another this summer. Either they're going to start shedding salary, which is something we saw the Golden State Warriors do with Jordan Poole, is they're going to swap him for Chris Paul from the Wizards, because while they're taking on a little bit of money right now in Chris Paul's contract, they're saving a ton of money long term. And most of the more rigorous penalties will kick in next year, about a year from now, on these teams that are really expensive and above what they're calling the second tax apron. I like to call it the super tax. It's a little more descriptive. So they're so you're going to see that happen. But then you're going to see other teams like the Phoenix Suns who said, okay, cool, I know this grace period year is designed around getting rid of some salary, moving some salary along, but this is our last chance to take on a ton of salary. So let's load up and do that right now, which is what they did in acquiring Bradley Beal. So we're going to be seeing some teams make some moves here over the next week or so at the start of free agency that are designed long-term, because the NBA is trying to push those really expensive teams to come back to the pack a little bit with their spending, while forcing all of the other teams to come up a little bit with how much they spend and try to get in. I guess the best way to say it is introduce some parity into the league through roster building and financial consideration.
And key to that last point, that was one thing I highlighted earlier in the show for the Pacers in particular, and the Spurs and other teams are having the same thought, is now before the season, there's the luxury or the tax floor a salary floor that they must hit, whereas normally you can wait till about this time next year to get until that level and meet those spending requirements. So that's a whole new thing that's impacting the other teams. You talked about the teams at the top. This is impacting those teams in terms of the salary at the bottom.
Yeah, absolutely. So we saw the team right there for you guys, the Indiana Pacers, a year ago sit on a ton of cap space into the season, and they used that very wisely to renegotiate and extend Miles Turner's contract. And that was really, a great move by them, great move for Turner, get some long-term stability in there with that situation. And it was almost at I don't want to say no cost, because I'm not the one writing the check.
Right.
No cost in terms of roster building, right? You basically had this extra cap space, so why not use it now? Because that was use it or lose it at space. In the future, what's going to happen is teams that are that far under the cap, they're going to have what's basically like a false cap hold put on their books that's going to be sitting there to bring them up. So you're not going to be able to just sit on, $30-40 million of cap space because what the league wants them to do is, hey, spend that on guys, spend that on players, spend it on, you don't have to necessarily go be in the play, for a max guy, but go spend it on 3-4 different guys at, 10-12 million a piece and bring those guys in and, strengthen your roster. So that's what they're trying to do is, incentivize those teams to spend more money that are the lower salary teams. Otherwise, you're going to be sitting there. The other thing they introduced too for those teams is if you're sitting there way under, and then when the luxury tax bills come due, which everybody shares in, that were non-tax-paying teams, you won't get your share of those tax bills if you don't meet your minimum salary obligation. So that's going to be a new dynamic as well that comes into play here over the next couple of years.
That's big money, too. I think Woj reported that it was like $44 million, the most of any team for the Pacers this past season. So you got to believe they like those and will want those checks. So you got to follow those qualifications to reach that threshold. And Keith, I'm curious, what do you foresee will be the trickle-down effect because of that? Because previously what you would do is see teams, because of that flexibility, they could get to the trade deadline. Maybe they wait and take on a bad contract, or maybe at the end of a year a team just has injuries and they need to blow up a team so then they can offload assets. Now you maybe won't have that that much flexibility because you've already had to tie down some of your cap space to reach those thresholds that you just addressed.
Yeah, I think you're on it with that. I think what we're going to see is teams almost have to pick a direction now in the summertime versus kind of taking the approach of, well, let's let the first couple months play out and see what it looks like headed into the season. Now what they're going to do is say, all right, well, we can't just sit on all this extra space and then we'll eat contracts in the course of the year from a team whose maybe season isn't going quite the way they thought it would. You almost have to do that now. And I think, that's one of the unintended consequences of this maybe. I think there's also a couple other unintended consequences is you're going to see some guys who might be more middling free agents where it's like, oh, okay, that's a nice player, $7-8 million a year, who may get, 12, 15 million because teams are like, well, we have to spend anyway. We kind of like their fit. Let's just pay them a little bit more and go. On the other end, for the really expensive teams like Phoenix, for example, because they're going to be limited to basically re-signing their own guys, I think you're going to see the Suns kind of give contracts out to guys like Torrey Craig, Jock Landale, kind of those mid-level free agents that should be, in the range of, minimum deal to $7 million deal. They're probably going to get deals that are $5 million to $10 million because for the Suns, what that does is that makes them a more salary in a trade that they can go send out down the line. So there's going to be a lot of interesting things that happen as far as those things go as teams build out their rosters here over the course of the summer.
Keith, when you're examining team by team and you factor in as Scott mentioned, the cap floor it's going to be implemented and the way that teams that spend big, like bigger market teams, as we just saw with Atlanta, trying to get out from underneath contracts, as we continue to see that mesh between teams being more willing to spend, but also the higher end spenders trying to get out from under these deals, the value that we just saw in that John Collins trade was effectively get Collins out of town. We don't want to pay him anymore. Okay, you're giving us Rudy Gay and a draft pick. Okay, fine. Thank you. This burden's finally off us. How more commonplace, if at all, is that type of trade going to be? Not just the trade itself, but the amount of lackluster assets being moved to salary dump.
Yeah, we're going to see a handful more of trades like that. For example, the Bradley Beal trade. That's basically what Washington did in that deal. Now I know they've turned Chris Paul's contract into Jordan Poole, and that's probably a lot is dependent on what you feel about Jordan Poole as a player. But the main get for the Wizards was, hey, we got out of $200+ million owed to Bradley Beal over the next 4 years. Now they took back $100+ million for Jordan Poole, and that's in part because spending over $100 million in cap space next summer wasn't going to be a real thing that the Wizards were actually going to be able to do. So they said, hey, we'll spend a little bit now, take in a guy like Jordan Poole, who I'm presuming they kind of like, and they feel like it'll still be tradable down the line. But you're going to see more deals like that. If we go back, if you've been following and covering the league for maybe more than a decade, it used to be pretty regular that teams were really capped out, and things like expiring contracts were a huge thing that teams wanted to have, because that allowed you to trade them to maybe take in a player whose contract on another team ran 2-3 years, but questionable for where that other team was headed. That's kind of what we saw in this John Collins trade, where it was, if you look at it on face, like, that's all they got for John Collins. What they really got was John Collins isn't on the cap sheet anymore.
Especially for ownership that seems to be mandating it. We'll see, but that seems to be the direction that's headed, as we're joined here with Keith Smith. The Spotrac does a great job covering the NBA, and in particular the cap sheets and all the minutia that goes into that. It's very complex, and I think fans in general are caring for it and studying that more than ever. And Keith, let's bring it back local to the Pacers. They really don't have a bad contract on their books. First of all, I think this offseason will be about agreeing to a max contract extension with Tyrese Halliburton. And then after that, I think perhaps consolidating again, perhaps a little bit. Maybe that's likely moving Daniel Tice. Maybe that's moving one of the guards in the backcourt. But you project the team to have about $32 million. And so right now, and currently with just one roster spot, I also wonder, do they offer some kind of J.J. Redick deal for a veteran, where you go big for 1-2 years because you're able to?
I love it. You called out the example I use all the time, which is J.J. Redick. When Philadelphia was ready to start winning, finally, right? It was, they paid J.J. Redick, back then, was that 5 years ago, I believe, 6 years ago, they gave him $19 million, and a lot of people were like, whoa, for J.J. Redick. But the reality was Philly only really had about 1-2 roster spots to fill, and they had a bunch of, which at that time, $19 million was a good chunk of cap space. They basically said, yeah, we can overpay to fill one spot. If you're the Pacers, you're in a great spot here, because with $30 million or so in cap space, what you can do is, and I'm completely making this up, not reporting, but let's say they love Kyle Kuzma in free agency. They could say, hey, okay, your best offer is $20 million from another team. We'll give you $25 million over the next 2 years, each season, and come in here and fill a huge need. And what that does for the Pacers is you fill a need, but the key is keep the contract short enough so that if it does turn kind of sour, it's not exactly the perfect fit you had hoped for, you can get out of it very easily within a year or two. And now that's going to be the kind of thing that they're very well positioned to do, because, as you said, they've only got about 1, maybe 2 open roster spots to fill. And, that's a great spot to be in, is having a ton of cap space. If you've got $40 million in space where you've got to fill 10 spots, that doesn't go quite as far as, having 30 with only 1 or 2 to fill. And that's good. It also is, that's a great piece to have as an extra chunk in a trade. If you're going to trade Daniel Tice at $9 million, you add him to your $32 million in cap space. Now we can bring in a $40 million player if you wanted to go that route, or a couple, $20 million guys or whatever. So their flexibility is really, really solid in Indiana.
Keith, in years past for free agency, there's always been a handful of guys at the very top that have made the market freeze because teams are wanting to bring in a top-tier player and spend a lot of money to do so, but it's a courtship process that sometimes makes everybody else have to either look around and make a decision if they want to try to go chase lower to mid-level guys, or if they want to chase those that are at the very top of the board. When you look at this year's free agent class, Russell Westbrook, James Harden, potentially Kyrie Irving, are any of those names the type that are market freezers? And if so, how does that impact the rest of the league as they're looking to approach free agency this year?
Maybe James Harden. We'll see. If James Harden is serious about entertaining offers from the Rockets, we've heard a couple other teams loosely mentioned, but if he's serious about that, then that will kind of hold things up a little bit, because for Houston, sitting on about $60 million in cap space, they're in a spot to really kind of control a lot of the free agency here, because they can basically outbid anybody for any one of these guys that's a free agent. And what that could do is the next guy down the list that they want to go after, let's say it's a Chris Middleton or a Brook Lopez or somebody like that, that could hold them up, because they may say, hey, hold on, if we can't get Harden, we've got $20-30 million for you that we can go after, and we can try to make that happen. And that tends to be, a little bit of things that hold things up. We're also going to see Damian Lillard. I think while we've been talking, Chris Haynes reported, sounds like he's sitting down with Portland this week to have a conversation about where they're going. We'll see. I mean, that's, we're year, umpteen of Damian Lillard, trade stuff. But if that turns into Damian Lillard says, all right, put me on the trade market, I want to go. Obviously, that'll freeze things quite a bit because what will happen is everybody's going to spend at least a little bit of time lining up their best offer for Damian Lillard, and we'll see where that kind of comes together with that. So that has the potential to kind of stall things out a little bit here, at least for, a good chunk of the teams in the league.
Okay, doesn't it seem like Dame now moving on seems inevitable because of who they've drafted, what that roster looks like, and it's one of those, I think we've talked about this maybe on text or DMs. It's like the Pacers were previously. It feels like Portland's past this expiration date.
Yeah, I mean, it does. Now, I will say you're right. You all have great experience with Miles Turner's been traded every year for it feels like 20 years, right? And then he's never actually been traded. It feels like we're a little bit there with Damian Lillard. But what I will say is Bradley Beal was in that boat. Now he's on the Phoenix Suns. Right, so I think we're in a little bit of a similar spot here with Portland, and my personal feeling, and this is just my read of this situation, is neither Damian Lillard nor the Trailblazers wants to be the one that says, "Hey, this has run its course. Let's break up." Neither one wants to be the bad guy here. When I think in reality, it's kind of like we all have those friends where it's like, God, would you break up already? Like, you guys don't like each other anymore, and you're just ruining it for everybody else. It feels like that's a little bit where we're at, but neither side, wants to be the one to actually put it on the table. And we'll see. It does feel like, though, we're closer than ever because Portland, went young at the draft. They kept their pick. They drafted a guy who overlaps with Damian Lillard positionally. They're in a spot where if they want to hit a hard reset, now's the time to do it.
Keith, that comment had me thinking about coaches getting fired and we have mutually agreed to move on or part ways. It does feel like that would be honest if it got to that level here, unlike those coaching announcements.
Yeah, exactly. That would be. I think we would all respect it, right? And be like, okay, they're finally there. With the coaching announcements, I could tell. I won't say who the coach was, but I could tell you, I had a coach tell me once, nothing was mutual when they told me you're out of a bunch of money that was headed your way. Like, there was nothing mutual about that. I wanted it, and they told me, nope, you're not getting it. So I think that's there's always a little bit more of a. Yeah, I don't know how mutual it was unless the guy has an immediate job lined up for the next one. So, but yeah, I'm with you with the Damian Lillard situation. It does feel like we are maybe finally there. I said going into the draft, I have a very hard time seeing Damian Lillard, and now since he was drafted, Scoot Henderson suiting up and playing games together in Portland. It just doesn't seem to make a lot of sense.
Keith, what's your evaluation on a free agent like Kyle Kuzma? Because I've struggled to get a proper read on him, even though he was the best player on a Wizards team that, was what they were last year. But then you try to incorporate, well, what did he look like when he was on a real contender out in L.A. towards the back end of his tenure there? And he wasn't a fully mature player yet. Perhaps that he needs to do what he did, which is go out and try to spread his wings somewhere in Washington. If he were to end up with a team, let's just say for the sake of argument, like the Pacers, because they're potentially linked to maybe another guard or a forward perhaps, where is the happy medium between his contract evaluation and not overpaying for a player that doesn't have a as clear-cut evaluation as you might like in this free agent class?
Yeah, that's kind of the tricky part, right? Because you're evaluating how much of his stats are real versus they're just kind of put up because of the situation. I tend to think they're a little bit more real with Kyle Kuzma just because he's always been a pretty efficient player. He makes most of his shots. He's a good shooter. He's pretty good rebounder, better passer than he gets credit for. He's not a great defender, but he holds his own defensively. So I tend to feel pretty good about Kyle Kuzma. So if the team gave him something in the average annual value of 25, 26 million a year, it wouldn't surprise me at all, and I think that'd be perfectly fair. And then we'd see that kind of come together, here over the life of the deal. I think that would be perfectly fine. Ideally, because he's starting to encroach a little bit, on the age 30 line. Maybe you try to go a little higher on the front end and have it be one of those descending contracts. So if he does fall off at all, it matches that. But I think, even if you go with the standard raises on a deal, you're going to be perfectly fine with him if it averages out at around 25 million or a little bit more, because I think, you put him in the right spot with the right guys around him, you're going to see his efficiency go up even more, because then the idea is, hey, he's getting better shots, more wide open looks, and you're getting a really good player. And if you have injuries or anybody's out of the lineup for any reason, you kind of throw him the ball and say, hey, we need you to go get us 25 tonight, and he can make that happen too.
Keith, thanks so much for the time. We'll see you out in Vegas, all right?
I appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
Great stuff there by Keith Smith. You can check out his work at Spotrac. Does a great job crunching the numbers, explaining the minutia that you need to understand why teams are doing the deals they are doing, like we just saw with Atlanta essentially offloading one of its former first-round picks in John Collins. And Jimmy, I keep going back for this Pacers final roster spot. Tobias Harris strikes me as the guy that would play the role as that J.J. Redick contract because he has 1 year left, over $30 million. The trouble is you'd want to know that you'd have an extension in place or that both sides could make that happen because the last thing you want to do is send out assets. He's here for 1 year and then walks. Dorian Finney-Smith's under contract, so you know that. He's a guy that Pacers were highly after from Brooklyn. And if neither one of those work out, to me, I think Harrison Barnes, knowing all the connections, the familiarity, and what the Pacers have available, I think he may be your next best option, especially when I'm pretty sure P.J. Washington, he's a restricted free agent. So do you want to get back involved in that game, which Herb Simon isn't the biggest fan of? And last year it didn't quite work out with DeAndre Ayton.
I mean, but again, they were saved. They were saved miraculously by not working out with DeAndre Ayton because even though from the hype standpoint of the year that Ayton had before that and the idea of having a player with as much of name recognition because he does still carry that in this league, albeit not at the level of Kevin Durant or Steph Curry or LeBron James or anything like that. But DeAndre Ayton was viewed by many as a very attractive free agent last year, and it would have been one of, if not the biggest free agent signing in Pacers history. But again, he is one of those aging prospects, not from a standpoint of his literal age, just from how the game is played, to the point that we're actually having conversations of, is DeAndre Ayton really going to be on this Suns roster? Are they going to keep him just because of nobody wants the amount of money that they're paying him on a yearly basis? So those are the two areas I don't want to see the Pacers wind up in. I'm not as mad at playing the restricted free agent game as the Simons probably are, or how risk averse they want to be with having your funds tied up in that particular area. For me, it's more so that I like the idea of overpaying a veteran on a short-term deal for twofold. As you mentioned, you need to get above that cap floor anyway, so you might as well bring in a piece that is going to be able to help not only your team on a nightly basis, but also help in the development of your rookies. And secondly, what I just don't want to have happen is them get caught up and their front office is far more intelligent than this to ever happen. You can see it by the way the roster is constructed right now, is getting a boat like bottom inconsistent teams in the East are, like Atlanta, where if the deal's too long, you're looking for a buyer to sell extremely low 2 or 3 years from now. That can't be a window that this Pacers core is a part of. Not if they want to go where they think they can in 3, 4, 5 years from now.
No, because as I'll reiterate, next year, it's about getting back to the playoffs. Mm-hmm. It's about allowing your young guys to experience it for the first time. About Tyrese, about Mathurin, about Miles Turner being back in the postseason once again. Then you hope to retool the roster slightly, add maybe that missing piece, or you hope one of your young guys takes a huge step. That could be Mathurin after 2 years in the league. Maybe what does Jarris Walker look like? Then you hope you're contending in the Eastern Conference. Next year, it's about getting back to the postseason.
I want to ask this question really quickly because we're talking about wings in the Pacers roster. Where does Kendall Brown fit in all this? Because I know he was a little bit of an uncertainty. I don't know what the status is, if he even has a future in the NBA.
So he's been at the Pacers facility almost every day. I've seen him a ton, Eddie, during these pre-draft workouts. Tyrese is almost always there, and Kendall Brown has been the other guy who I've seen most frequently. Kendall right now is still rehabbing from his injury. I don't know where he's at physically. My expectation is that he will play in Summer League. He'll be with the team next week for what they call free agent rookie camp. In terms of what he looks like in the future has not been decided because the Pacers need more info. They need to see what he looks like at Summer League. And if he's able to play, if he's able to look healthy, then I think you're most likely looking at him coming back on a 1-year deal on a 2-way contract once again and kind of treating last year as a rookie contract. But he's a guy I checked in on today, and that's kind of the case with him. It's We need to see him at Summer League, then we'll make a determination because we're not sure what he looks like against competition. And even last year, he was still very raw. He was like the fourth best player, if that, on the Mad Ants, still trying to find his footing. He said things were really coming too quickly for him, and that's the case really with all rookies. But then he suffered that setback with a stress fracture, which required surgery, and that's what he's trying to get back from.
Yeah, I was just asking because he's 20 years old. He can't even legally buy a beer yet, and just from that aspect, like the Pacers are going to have to hit on those kind of players in development, just because of where they're at in terms of a market size and just the overall just interest that big players may not have coming here. So I think they have to be able to develop those kind of role players, similar to like what Milwaukee has done, and then Toronto back in their heyday. So, yeah, that's why I was asking about him.
No, they hope he's part of the future. I think after a stress fracture injury and something where you had surgery this spring, you're not sure what it looks like and how soon you might be able to contribute, especially as you kind of toss out this last season as a redshirt year is basically what I'm calling it.
That's Scott Agnes. I'm Jimmy Cook. Eddie Garrison with us as well. Still to come, we'll end the day with some bets. Next segment, we'll get a quick Reds update with Eddie Garrison, see how he's feeling after the win
I haven't heard any cheers.
Comes to an end.
No cheers today.
Well, we don't have in-game action today. Reds get underway a little bit later this evening.
Okay.
But we'll get Eddie's pulse on that. And then I believe, I could be wrong on this because it's always a revolving door around here, but this might be the last opportunity we get to see Scott before NBA Summer League starts. So we'll get Scott Agnes's takeaways, what he's most looking forward to with Summer League, as we've already dived in a little bit to what we expect from free agency a little bit later this week. That and more when we come back. It's the Fan Midday Show, 93.5, 107.5 The Fan. The Fan. Inside the DriveHuber.com studios, it is the Fan Midday Show. Jimmy Cook, Scott Agnes, Eddie Garrison jamming and producing with us throughout the afternoon. We'll also get Eddie's evaluation of the Reds this segment. But first, I want to take a look at NBA Summer League upcoming. Of course, there still is a handful of leagues that take place with summer action. You have the California Classic out there in Sacramento, where this year's lineup appears to be Miami, the Lakers, Charlotte, Golden State, Sacramento. That'll be your switch there. I guess San Antonio is going to make an appearance there as well, just looking at everything on NBA.com. Salt Lake City Summer League, and you don't have the whole contingent of the league out there. Memphis, Philadelphia, Utah, clearly Oklahoma City will round things out there. And then where the big boys, everybody arrives. Las Vegas is truly, and as you would expect, because it is a central hub of NBA action in the summer, and they've done a great job building this thing up from the very ground floor. But now it is the place to be, as Scott mentioned, basically a convention for the NBA, July 7th through the 17th. And that's probably underselling it a bit, because you can literally turn one corner, Mike Breen will be to your left, and all of a sudden Adrian Wojnarowski's over there to your right, breaking news. Bang! Thank you. I appreciate that. We don't have that China.
I was going to hold on, Eddie. You don't have that as a hotkey?
We should.
How do you not?
We don't.
That's truly a hotkey.
We will take an L on that portion of the production side of things. I'll wear that as well with Eddie, and hopefully we put it back in there at some point. Hey, you have time. Breen's not going to... I was surprised to see him a couple years ago still be involved with Summer League. Now he's kind of taking a step back, where it's usually the likes of Ryan Rucco or Mark Jones or Doris Burke.
The next wave, as it should be.
Yes, absolutely.
You're calling the finals for 19 straight years or whatever it is.
You can take a week off or two. It's probably fine.
On top, by the way, of being the number one option for the New York Knicks in the number one media market, I think you figured this thing out.
Breaks are fine okay somewhere.
The reality is all of us get into this business not for... It's for the reps, for the experience, for the chance to call the game. So, yeah, even though I'm sure it's pennies on the dollar what he gets for the finals, we love it. We want to keep doing it.
How much easier does it take your process as a beat reporter over the last 2 or 3 years with, at least from the Pacers standpoint, Summer League pretty much being consolidated to one event? It's no longer in a practice facility in Orlando that's closed to everybody but scouts and a handful of media members. As Vegas has become the true destination for every team and the destination for most teams, usually it's not multiple spots anymore. How does that make your process of it all easier?
Everybody's there. Anybody you need is there. Every marquee agent is out there. Even secondaries are there. So essentially, again, it's the convention. It brings everybody in one place. I will say, I did prefer the Orlando setup because although you had 10 teams down there, no one else...
Big Disney World guy?
No, not even that. Jimmy, it was the fact that it felt like basketball.
Sure.
Whereas in Vegas, it feels like a production. You're waiting for a TV timeout. You're having team introductions. You're running into fans on the concourse. Again, in Orlando, you're coming through, you're parking in the parking garage across the street, you're coming in a side door, you're greeted by media relations, you slide in, and I'm basically going from the media room to the gym. And that's it. And so Larry Bird was in the hallway. You just briefly talked to him. I remember when Brad Stevens took the Boston job, I talked to him, and there wasn't fans. There weren't autograph seekers. They weren't selling tickets. Now it's become that big production where one of the big reasons they have everybody there is every game's on television. Fans, they're selling tickets at $45
Grows
each.
the game further in terms of it feeling like these summer games matter, even though big picture they don't really, as long as everybody stays healthy.
Which is why I laughed, because during the NBA Finals, which is the best basketball you would hope in the world throughout the year, they're advertising one of its poorest product.
Hey,
come through and watch Summer League upcoming in July.
Come on, you know how that works.
And I get why it is. It's because ESPN has a stake in it. Sure. They want people to watch. There's not much going on in July, so that's an opportunity for those eyeballs. But at the same time, I laughed at the overlap there. I'm like, no. Your diehards who are watching the finals are going to watch anyway. You don't need to advertise that. But it's going to be a blast coming up next Friday, not this one. Next Friday, the 7th, with marquee matchups. Pacers play the 8th and then every other day. So I like the easiness of that, where it's very game day practice for about a week straight.
How does your anticipation for this summer league for the Pacers compare to last year when you had Benedict Mather at the forefront, Andrew Nembhard there as well? Looking at this year with Ben Shepherd and Jarris Walker, to name a few of the rookies that will be out there in Las Vegas.
I would say it's similar, if not more, because we want to see how Walker, what he looks like on the court, what he looks like against that light competition. He's cut some weight. Still looks very strong out there. How well will Ben Shepherd shoot it? Again, though, big picture, I kind of use the hashtag, but remember it's Summer League.
Yeah,
so
it's a scrimmage.
if a guy goes off, remember it's Summer League. If a guy looks terrible, it's a little bit of a yellow flag.
He sucks.
Right. But it's also just Summer League. I think it was like Tyler Hansbrough. I want to say he crushed it at Orlando Summer League.
Gosh.
What did that mean?
Wow.
Josh McRoberts crushed it. I think it's Summer League. And then on the other side, maybe even like TJ Leaf didn't have a good Summer League. And yeah, I don't know. There's not too much you can take out of it. More than anything, it's great because it's an opportunity to get in front and talk to so many people at the same event. So I'm sure, for example, Kelvin Sampson will be there from Houston to watch Jarris Walker play. It'll give me a chance to talk with him. I talked with Mark Few, Gonzaga's coach, about Andrew Nembhard. Otherwise, I'm guessing he's not going to take that phone call and do that interview. But because I'm there, we had just watched Andrew play, it was an opportunity for me and thus readers to learn a little bit more about what Andrew was like.
I can't wait for Oscar Tshiebwe to have like 15 and 18 and everyone starts like, oh, next Dwight Howard.
Put him on the 15-man roster, Eddie. Yeah. He goes for 20 blocks in back-to-back games or 20 rebounds in back-to-back games plus 3 blocks. You're going to have people calling for that. But remember, it's Summer League.
Where do you find, as you're looking at the different courts of Cox Pavilion and Thomas and Mack out there in Las Vegas, this is also an opportunity as well. We mentioned all the games don't really matter, but if you're a player that has signed a undrafted contract or assigned a contract with a summer league team as a second or third year player, you're still trying to make an impact to potentially gain a contract. With that one roster spot, do you anticipate that evaluation period being any different for the Pacers than it would be other teams that aren't just focused on their guys that are there, but the players on other teams that are looking for homes?
I think you have to treat it the same every year, regardless of what your current situation is, because you never know when it might change or when. Think about Utah. This was a team with cap flexibility. Well, now they kind of got rid of that flexibility by taking on John Collins' contract. Same thing with the Wizards. They were going to have some flexibility. But by taking on Jordan Poole's contract, that kind of tweaks their offseason plans. And so I think you have to come into it with an open mind and trying to find a player or two who, if you have space, you might sign. And if you can get under your control with your G League program. Or maybe one two-way. And again, teams this year, starting July 1, can sign up to 3 players for two-way contracts, not just 2. So that opens 30 new roster spots that have to be filled here. And so you already have one filled with Oscar from Kentucky. There's one set for sure. Kendall Brown is in line, I think, for one of them. And Isaiah Wong probably, although I haven't got clarity on his situation just yet. But also maybe a player is waived by one of these teams that just needs to clear cap space. Things like that. That's another reason why I think this Pacers team still needs to consolidate the roster some, Jimmy, because I want to get it down. I think to the start of camp, they should bring in the full 21 guys that you can bring to camp. But I think it would be smart play for them to leave one roster spot open going into the next year, knowing a player may randomly get waived or call a guy up from a two-way contract and see what he's able to contribute right away without having to waive a guaranteed contract.
We talked a little bit already about the free agency ripple effects that are going to take place as everything gets underway. But as you look at the rest of the Pacers roster, is there a name that jumps out at you of those that are participating in Summer League that has the most to gain in terms of roster positioning or evaluation going into the season? It's obviously not going to be the top tier of the class of Jarris Walker or Ben Shepherd, but where is the most to be gained as you kind of look at the names that have come out for who's going to be on this roster for the Pacers?
Yeah, and in previous years, if you remember, like Aaron Nesmith was acquired midway through Summer League and finished and played like 2 games with him, and that ended up being tough for him because he didn't know anyone, didn't know the plays, none of that, and didn't look good. And again, that was a situation where it came to the regular season and looked sharp. We don't know exactly what the roster will look like. I'm curious if Isaiah Jackson, if Chris Duarte, this would really be their last year to participate in Summer League. I do not expect it, but those two would have a lot to gain with getting a couple games in. And wouldn't it be interesting to see Ben Shepherd, Chris Duarte? I can't imagine Andrew Nembhard would play either with Matherin.
Not to read too much into it, but if Duarte was participating that would also give him another opportunity to show, even if it is summer league, his health status and what he would bring to an NBA roster. I don't want to read too much into it, but if he was a part of that roster, would that give any more movement or rumblings towards the idea of him being a movable piece around this time?
No, I think it would tell me he just wants reps. He wants to get out there, play real competition. I don't expect Duarte and Isaiah Jackson to participate.
It would be a rarity if they did. You don't usually see it unless it's a player that's, again, truly either not close to journeyman territory, but somebody that is trying to re-show themselves as a valuable piece on another stage.
Yeah, usually if you're a veteran, meaning like beyond 1 year,
you're courtside.
there's been some issue, or you didn't get an opportunity to show what you could do. And Kendall Brown, for example, is the perfect example there. And so I would love to see what Kendall Brown is able to contribute, and then see what Jarris Walker do for probably just a couple of games. Maybe you push Shepherd and Walker into 3 games. I struggle to see them playing 4. And then you bring in other guys, and Isaiah Wong playing for your team. There's been a couple other guys that have agreed to just summer league deals trying to earn a place in training camp. That's where I also am more of a fan of what we used to have, Jimmy, with the Orlando Summer League, because these guys, their job's on the line. And so it's kind of awkward to me when, like, during the first time out, you got an MC there. Hey, look up, here's this contest. It's like, hey, this guy's basically going through a job interview.
Sure. But in a way, that it's simulating real league atmosphere. No?
From that respect, you're right. Yeah, it is. So I think, as usual, it's just those rookies. You want to get a taste of, can they look comfortable out there? It's less so about the numbers they put up. How quickly do they fit in? I want to see Shepherd's basketball IQ, read, react. How does he look defensively? Can he hold his own? And then I fully expect him to knock down shots, even though there is that you got to adapt a little bit to the further line from the college 3 to the NBA 3. Usually takes guys about a half a season.
Just going off of the casual fan or just normal viewer perspective, not the media perspective, and that's why what Albert Hall and Warren Legary have been able to build out there in Las Vegas is so appeasing to the fans. Look, even as a diehard basketball fan, it was tough turning on NBA TV to a crew I really didn't recognize in a practice gym in Orlando with an atmosphere that felt like it was something you were watching at the Y. From a media perspective, I'm right there with you. The access was tremendous and a different feel for it than Las Vegas. But for the consumer standpoint, even if it is the same product of it's just Summer League, I mean, you would agree as well as anybody that there's just the whole vibe of the spectacle of the entertainment aspect in Las Vegas. I know the numbers still aren't like, they're not touching NBA playoff games by any means, but it is a more palatable product when you see it out there in Las Vegas.
If you're a big Pacer fan or NBA fan, I would encourage you to go out to Summer League sometime. And if you do, though, don't wait until like after the first weekend. It's important to go that first weekend because those top players, that's when you're going to have the chance to see them. And so you might see Victor Wembanyama versus Scoot Henderson in game 1, and then they might be shut down or something.
Over
so make
under
sure
2.5, by the way.
Under.
For Victor?
Yes.
Okay.
Absolutely. I thought you said 2 earlier. Under.
I just wanted to...
To me, that is easy under.
Okay.
Might be 1, probably 2. Especially because Jimmy, he's been playing all summer long while these guys have been going through the pre-draft process. He was trying to be winning a title over in France.
I respected the Spurs allowing him to do that, but that's so rare when you see.
They also don't have any technical
Correct, they can't say, hey, don't do it. Right,
he's not under their rights just.
But I'd be worried if I was him, because like I'm not saying he wouldn't have still gone number 1, but I mean,
well, first of all, I can tell you if the execs are saying like if this guy tore his ACL or had some other injury, he's still going number 1. He's that significant of a player and game changer. Secondly, the other thought to all that is Victor could just as easily, or any player for that matter, get injured going through a pre-draft workout.
Sure.
Shane Whittington, a former Pacer, now back working with the team. He suffered an injury that required surgery. It happened during a pre-draft workout. So there's no safe haven. There's no safe way to go about this. And so if anything, you just prefer him playing significant competition and pushing himself, and I think that says a lot about him, that though he was inevitably going to be the number 1 pick, he was still putting himself out there and probably didn't want to let his teammates down either. They built that team for him, for him to get to the NBA, and I'm sure you saw over the weekend that fantastic photo in San Antonio of the greats getting together for a dinner. And I would love to be like a tape recorder sitting right there in the middle of the table with Sean Elliott, Tim Duncan, David Robinson, Victor. And am I missing? Yeah, I think that's it.
I can't remember.
I did see the video of him missing shots too.
But remember, it's summer.
Hey, he's unguarded, Scott. There's no rumor. There's no. You can't make any exceptions.
Eddie, let's
unguarded
let's
in
you
an
and
open
me
gym.
go on a 3-day bender, and then let's go to an open availability media shoot around and see how we do.
Okay, I bet you I can make 2. I may need the glass, but I'll make 2.
Those guys are so worn out. Less so Victor because he didn't do the true pre-draft process, but he was actually playing games.
Right.
The difference is the pre-draft process, a lot of these guys might be flying to 14 different cities over a month's span. They are drained, plus the emotional toll it takes. They're drafted. Those that are eligible probably had a few cocktails, took the private jet, and it's 9 a.m. and they have to be on and answering questions. I don't envy that. That's tough, but they're also getting paid handsomely.
We'll take our final break. When we come back, we'll hand out some bets and deliver on our promise of getting a Reds pulse from one Eddie Garrison here on The Fan.
Back for the final time here on the Fan Midday Show with Jimmy Cook. I'm Scott Agnes. Jimmy, I feel like since we only have a few minutes left, I got to give you at least your platform here to discuss the Reds. I can't add anything to this conversation, but go ahead.
To be clear, that's not my platform. I'm the resident Yankee fan. It's Eddie Garrison that's been carrying the flag. Eddie, at one point, a 12-game win streak.
Yes, sir.
First cycle since 1989 from Ellie De La Cruz, but they dropped 2 straight to the Braves. At the end of that, how do you bottle up that win streak, and what's next for the Reds as they begin a new series this evening?
So they're in Baltimore tonight, in case you were wondering or you forgot who they were playing. They're in Baltimore tonight to start a 3-game series. I think it's just remarkable that they even made it that far when you consider they're missing their top 2 pitchers from their rotation to start the season in Hunter Green and Nick Lodolo, and now it's being reported that it was already for sure that Hunter Green would Nick Lodolo would be out until like August, and now C. Trent Rosecrans of The Athletic is reporting that Hunter Green will also be out until August. So it's not looking good right now for that Red starting rotation. The bullpen has been solid, but they're starting to get to that point, Jimmy, where they've been relied on so much during the early part of the season. Now that you're approaching the halfway point, and if they're legit about making a postseason run, they're going to have to be active at the deadline, which is less than a month away, I think, to get some starting pitching. Because you can't afford to roll the guys out that you're rolling out right now who are only going 3-4 innings.
When we started the season, you, like many Reds fans, and I don't blame you at all, because you hear from any of their front office or higher-ups their feelings overall about the fans and the amount of money they're willing to spend or lack thereof recently. But the tune has changed because of the fact that they're in first place, the Central, and they are at a spot that no one envisioned them being. As you look at where the roster is right now, Eddie, but knowing that it is very hard in baseball to make the playoffs and be in a position to contend right now, do you want them to be aggressive big spenders?
I would love them to, because they have so many young guys and they have a clog right now in the middle infield. They have a lot of middle infielders that they can move around. They've got some tantalizing prospects that they can move as well. I mean, they've got a couple outfielders that are going to be really promising. They've got some role guys in the lineup right now, like Nick Sigzell, who can be easily moved because he's a guy that a team like a Houston or in LA, like the Dodgers or another team out west, could be in the search for, because he's a utility guy. He can play outfield. He can play third base. He hits lefties really well. He's got the top average against lefties in the MLB. So they have some opportunities here to move some players, move some prospects to get some pitching.
NBA free agency is right around the corner. I want to get Scott's final thoughts before that process gets underway. But first, let's give out some bets.
The Jay Cook Plays of the Day.
This is me, all right? I'm not a athlete. This is my way. This is how I win.
Today's plays of the day. Group play still ongoing in the race for the CONCACAF Gold Cup. Give me Panama over Costa Rica. That's a tie, no bet. So if this thing goes to his draw, you're getting your money pushed back to you there. In baseball, going to lay 1.5 on the Seattle Mariners as they host the Washington Nationals. And give me the Cincinnati Reds on the money line at plus 105 against the Baltimore Orioles. Eddie, what do you like this evening?
I'm going to go in that Reds game. I'm going to stick with the offense. I'm going over 10, like I was just talking about. That Reds bullpen and pitching staff, they are just beat up right now. They're weak. Offense has been clicking. I think combined 15-plus in the last 3 games against the Atlanta Braves, going over 10 there. And then I don't like any other games really tonight. I think it's a good pitching matchup in Atlanta between the Braves and the Twins, though. Spencer Strider and Sonny Gray. So 8.5 is probably about where I'd put it.
Any rooting interest in the College World Series for either of you?
Oh, man. I have loved this one. I love LSU. Paul Skeens, he's going to go number 1 overall in the MLB draft, which is in a couple weeks. So I really like the game tonight. Go Tigers.
Minus 160 if you're interested in backing LSU. Scott, this will be the last time that we talk to you before NBA Summer League. We already hit on that, but also before NBA free agency starts. Got about 90 seconds here as you kind of reassess the day for biggest need. Is Barnes your front runner? Is there a key piece in your mind, maybe not for the franchise, but what you would like to see them do?
Yeah, it's at that 3 spot. I think you kind of shored up a little bit, at least that power forward with Jarris Walker, but you really need a 3-and-D wing to add to the fold here. You got Aaron Nesmith. Jordan Wara has shown that he's capable. I would love more of a defensive-minded 3, and that's why if it's up to me, I really like Dorian Finney-Smith. Very good contract. I think it's like $13-14 million. He's under control for several years. That makes a lot of sense. If in the trade market you want a 1-year big spending type guy, that's Tobias Harris for sure. And if you can't really swing any of those, although I think a trade has to happen, there's at least a player or two. Ideally, you trade a couple of guys. Then you're really looking at probably Harrison Barnes in the free agent market.
He's Scott Agnes. Again, you can follow him on Twitter at Scott Agnes. You can follow where he has his work at Fieldhouse Files. And, of course, subscribe to that newsletter as well. One of 107.5's The Very Own. Glad to have you on board again.
Yeah, good to be back in the saddle with you after the draft, man.
Special thanks to Brian Nash, Beau, Estes, and Keith Smith. Podcast will be up. Just search the Fan Midday Show wherever you get your podcast. Right with JMV is next. Keep it right here.